of Laws, notice is hereby given that a final hearing before this commission is appealable to the Chancery Court of Davidson County or the Circuit Court of Davidson County via a statutory writ or certiorari. You're advised to seek your own independent legal counsel to ensure that your appeal is filed in a timely manner and that all procedural requirements are met. You should also seek independent legal advice regarding the applicability of the writ of certiorari to the specific decision of the Historic Zoning Commission. Anybody have a chance to review last month's minutes? We have a motion to approve.
Move approval.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All opposed? All right. Pass. Okay, first we're going to do the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda will be voted on at a single time. No individual public hearing will be held, nor will the commission debate these items unless a member of the audience or the commission requests that the item be removed from the consent agenda. Are there any items that anyone wants to move off the consent agenda from the audience? Okay. Take it away, Sean.
Okay. We have 7 items on consent agenda today. We don't have the remote, so you'll have to be my assistant. I'll assist you as well. The first is 2216 29th Avenue South. It's constructing an addition and an outbuilding with a setback reduction. 1802 Linden Avenue, demolishing an existing outbuilding, building a new with a setback reduction. There's an addition to that, to the primary structure as well. Yes. 128 2nd Avenue North. Excuse me. That's an application for signage. It doesn't meet the design guidelines, but because of other factors with building staff, found it to be compatible and appropriate. 1706 Sweetbriar Avenue. It's an application for an addition and demolition of an outbuilding. 1714 Sweetbriar Avenue, application to install solar panels. 1808 Sweetbriar Avenue, application of a new outbuilding. And 3902 Kimpalong Avenue, that's an application for an addition. There were conditions that the applicant has agreed to. So having all 7 of those found to be meeting their respective design guidelines, staff recommends approval of them as a consent agenda.
Okay. Thanks, Sean. Any questions for Sean? Okay. Any questions from anyone in the audience? Okay. Close public hearing. Any discussion? Motion?
Move to approve.
Okay. Second?
Sorry, do we argue these one by one, or I have a question about the second one.
Okay. The second.
1802 Linden.
Then we'll ask if that could just be removed
Yeah.
and presented as a new case, and if you would approve assuming there's no other questions or concerns or comments, approve the other items.
Yeah. So we'll move the 1702 off of the consent agenda and make it part of the real agenda. Is that okay? I'm sorry, I wasn't clear about that. Let me restate that. The consent agenda, we're approving that. It was approved at staff level, and we're going to approve it all at once. So if there's anyone in the audience that has a question about any of them, we'll pull them off the consent agenda and listen to them as part of the actual new business. So is there any other besides 1702?
1802.
1702
1802
and 1802. Okay.
1802.
1802. Okay. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay, move to approve.
Okay. I think we had a second. Okay. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Okay. So the consent agenda is approved with the exception of 1802.
Since this was on consent agenda, we didn't prepare slides beyond the mailed recommendations. So I guess I'll try not to just read verbatim, but I'm going to start with the analysis on page 8. So as I said in the summary, there's new construction, demolishing an outbuilding and constructing a new outbuilding. The existing outbuilding is non-contributing, so demolition meets the design guidelines. The new construction, the new outbuilding will be roughly 1,000 square feet, which is about the same size as the existing non-contributing accessory building. It's actually very similar to a design that was approved, I believe in 2009, that was approved with the setback reduction. The new building would be located 11 feet from the rear property line and 3 feet from the side. Current bulk zoning regulations require a 20-foot rear setback for garages over 700 square feet, but because the proposed garage is about the same size as the existing garage, and because it's not quite a double lot, but wider than your typical lot, staff found that the 1,000 square foot footprint was appropriate and recommends approval and finds that the proposed location to be appropriate. The new building will be 18 feet tall with 9-foot eaves. That's essentially a one-story garage, a two-car garage with a little extra space, but the height is subordinate to the primary building and compatible. The materials of the new building will be cement fiber stucco panels with wood trim, composite shingle roof that matches the primary building. Staff doesn't know the window and door material, so that's something that we would review administratively and approve with talking to the applicant. The addition, if you can, I guess you probably have to look at your site plans for this. The addition will be at the rear left corner of the house. Can you maybe go in I think the second consent slide. It just shows a picture of the house. Yeah, so it's a long, low, horizontally oriented Tudor Revival style house. You can see on the left there, that's an existing porch that's been enclosed. It's shown as being open on the 1951 Sanborn. The new addition will be behind that. It'll be 11 feet behind and I think 1.5 feet taller than the ridge of that existing side addition or side porch, but lower than the roof of the primary ridge. So staff found that because of its location behind and being subordinate to the primary structure, staff found that that scale was appropriate. The materials are also the same essentially as what's being used for the garage, stucco. I'm not sure if that's stucco panels or true stucco, but either would be appropriate. Wood trim, parge, concrete block foundation, and a composite shingle roof matching the house. As with the garage, the window and door materials would need to be reviewed and approved administratively. Staff's recommendation, the conclusion is to recommend approval of the application to construct the new rear addition, to demolish the non-contributing garage and construct a new one with roughly same area, although in a different location with reduced setbacks, with the condition that the windows and doors of both structures be approved administratively.
Okay.
The applicant is here. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer any.
Okay.
As well.
First, any questions to staff? Okay. Thanks, Sean. Well, not you yet. First, let me get the applicant to speak first, and just state your name and address.
Yes, Michael Ward with Allard Ward Architects, representing 1802 Linden Avenue. We've been working with staff on this particular building for several years with the previous owner as well as the current owner. So the demolition, this existing 1,000 square foot 4-car garage has no setbacks. It's sort of built tight to the alley and it sort of leans its weight against the garage next door. So we're reconstructing a building that will meet setbacks of typical outbuildings on the opposite side of the property, away from the garage that is on the property line. So to make it more buildable and to open up the yard a little bit better, we have tried to keep the scale pretty low and similar with the house, and it is a stucco panel. The addition is real stucco. The garage is stucco panel.
Okay, thanks. Any questions, architect? Okay, thanks. Okay, open public hearing. If you, please, everyone who comes up, just please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Okay. All right, come on up and please state your name and address. Thank you.
My name is Mike Costello. I live at 1800 Linden Avenue, the property right next door. The property line they propose to put the new proposed garage and the setback reduction. I guess I'm confused as to why the setback reduction is needed. They have a very large lot compared to other properties in the neighborhood. My property also has a large lot. Most properties in Hillsborough, Belmont are much smaller in size. So I'm kind of wondering why they need to put the length of the new garage along my property line within 3 feet rather than the proposed or the restrictions say 5 feet. Their property is flat. There's no drop-offs. There's no large trees that they need to build around. So I guess I feel that the reason why these restrictions are in place is to prevent something just like this. And I guess that's the only argument I have.
Okay. Thank you. Does anyone else in the audience want to speak regarding this project? Okay, thank you. Close public hearing. Discussion. I guess, Sean, maybe you can just point out about the setback communication you had with the applicant.
Well, to start off, for accessory buildings, 700 square feet or less, 700 square feet or 50% of the footprint of the house or less, the setback would be, for this design, would be 20 feet at the rear. 10 feet, sorry, now I'm getting confused. 10 feet and 3 feet on the sides. If you're over that, over 700 square feet or 50%, it jumps up to 5-foot side and a 20-foot rear. But historically, accessory buildings were built much closer to the alley, much closer to the property lines. As you can see on the setback, the existing building, which is kind of like a concrete block building with a chicken coop or maybe even a stable or something attached, it's in poor shape, but that's right on the property line, and that's sort of indicative of how the location of historic accessory buildings. That's a little bit closer than we would want to approve now because of easements and eave overhangs and things like that, but staff found that the 11-foot setback proposed for the rear and the 3-foot side setback was not out of character, not inconsistent with the location of historic accessory buildings. So that's why we found the proposed location to be appropriate.
Thanks, Sean. Any other discussion?
Yeah, Sean, if you could tell us real quickly, I understand the requirements for when the setback changes as the structure grows. Can you tell us exactly how big the structure is, how much over?
Yeah, I was wrong. I said 1,000 square feet before. That's the existing accessory building that's being demolished. This one's 920 square feet, so it's actually a little bit smaller.
So 220 feet above the 700?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm assuming the nature of the rear is an alley?
Yes, it is. Sorry, 980 square feet, so it's 280. But yeah, there is a rear alley. There is also the existing outbuilding is accessed by a front driveway. The driveway serves this house and the adjacent house, so the driveway will remain, excuse me, but the new garage at least will be accessed from the alley.
Sean, did you say that the side setback, given the size, is it 5 or 10? Not assuming any historic overlay.
5 foot.
5. Did you discuss with the applicant whether they'd be willing to do 5?
I think we had a discussion, but found that 3 was appropriate.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm confusing this one with another because there are a lot of similar applications. People always want to make sure that there's enough room to get a lawnmower through there, to get the trash cans through. But other than that, because we don't have too much concern about a 3-foot setback.
I think the neighbor, made some points that there seems to be nothing unique about the property. And since we have the applicant here, can you move it back to 5 feet? Is that going to affect anything adversely for you, just given that we have this request and it may have been unexpected?
The 3-foot was approved was allowed when we had it approved a couple years ago, so we just stayed with that direction. I don't really care how big your backyard is. The space behind the garage is sort of wasted. Quite frankly, it's airspace that practically belongs to 1800. I mean, there's not much to use it for. It's not an aisleway or anything for us. Construction sometimes will prohibit you from building as close as 3, and we even told the contractor last week if you need to pull 4 feet to build it, do so. So I guess if that's what it's going to take to get it built, we'll say 5, but it just means we actually probably develop the 5 feet between the garage and the property line as opposed to just sort of letting it be landscaping. So if that would be the preference, then we can do that.
You're getting the rear one.
Yes.
There's no objection to the rear, and I think that's the most significant one. So.
Correct.
It seems like, in terms of when neighbors come and ask for things, this seems pretty simple. So if you're willing to do it, I think that makes it easy for everybody.
We can do that.
Maybe you got a motion there?
Public hearing.
Motion, do we need to close the public hearing?
It's closed.
Motion to approve staff recommendation with the addition, with the exception that the side setback of the garage be 5 feet rather than 3.
Have a second?
Second.
All in favor? All opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, the next one is 1818 Wildwood Avenue.
This one came to you last month with the applicant being the potential buyer. It's before you now with the current owner as the applicant. All the information is the same as last month, but they've provided you with some new appraisals. Economic hardship is not based on the owner's personal financial situation, but instead when the cost of repairs outweigh the value. In this case, the current value is approximately $115,000. The estimate of repairs is approximately $115,000, which is about $10,000 less than the estimated post-repair value of $240,000. Considering the purchase price was approximately $13,000, and without any information about equity investment to the property since 1979 or dollar valuation fluxes, the potential return could be considered to be as much as $113,000. Staff recommends disapproval of demolition of this building based on economic hardship, finding that the cost of repairs does not outweigh the value. Because of the historic value of the house, demolition meets Section 3B1A for inappropriate demolition, and demolition does not meet Section 3B2 for appropriate demolition.
Okay. Any questions to staff? So this report is the needs analysis for lack of a better word, needs analysis in the back. That's all here.
Yes, the analysis is fully there. Everything is the same as last time
Okay.
in terms of what they submitted, except for you also have those new valuations, current and after repairs.
Okay, thanks.
But otherwise, all the information is the same about the condition it's in, historic value, and so forth.
Robin, I'm trying to shuffle through this quickly, and I can see the appraised value at $115,000. Can you tell me and keep me from looking what the repair value would be?
Yes, it was $240,000.
Okay.
So the math is 115 plus 115 is less than 240? Is that
Correct.
it in a nutshell?
Yeah.
Okay, any more questions to Robin?
Robin, I'm not sure if it was you or who handled it, but meeting with the engineer on site, did you all do that?
We did. We did tour the property when the engineer was there. We had some discussions about, is it repairable or not? He said in his opinion, it shouldn't be repaired, but that it certainly could be. And that's in that document that you looked at last month, he outlined the different options on how it could be repaired.
It seems like what's kind of taking place here is in this 17.40.420.d, these items that we may consider, that there's some that we may consider one way and there's some that we consider the other way. So they're almost at odds with one another. Is that, I mean, we've got,
You may consider all of them, and it's up to you to evaluate them.
talked about this last time, the drafting of this is just not very helpful for a decision maker.
It's a tough one, and I'll tell you, I'm sure the ordinance could stand improvement in that regards, but I will say that it's tough for everybody around the country. Every city that deals with these, it's very, very difficult. Even with the most beautifully crafted ordinance, there's still a real struggle. Still very difficult.
So what your motion, or your finding to not approve
Correct.
is based on, I think, number 3, the estimated market value of the property in its current condition and an estimated property, the value after the undertaking.
No, sir, those are not standards to follow. Those are items that you may request and you may consider. But the definition for economic hardship that's in the design guidelines talks about the value needs to, or the cost of repairs needs to outweigh the value. That's what we looked at.
Where is that?
It's in the design guidelines, and I believe it's on page 8. Let me double check, though. Page 8, thanks.
The design guideline trumps the may consider hardships list there or not?
No, they're two different things. The guidelines give the definition of economic hardship, and the ordinance gives you your process. It gives you those items that you can look at, ask for, and consider in making your decision on whether or not there is a hardship.
So what you're saying is, given the design guideline definition, it just stops right there? It doesn't
No.
meet that?
They're two separate issues. The design guidelines set up the definition. Then the ordinance lists all the items that you can ask for in order to help you make your decision. They're not standards to be followed. One doesn't trump the other. They work together to help you come to a decision. So.
Okay, any more questions to Robin?
I think if you look at the definition of economic hardship, it says a condition that warrants demolition where the cost of structure plus the repairs are greater than the market value of the structure. That doesn't seem to be the case here. If you take the third-party appraisal, the third-party estimate for the repairs, and the third-party after-repair appraisal, it's $10,000 short, so it's very close. So to me, that makes it pretty clear where you land, except I'm hung up a little on...
I tell you what, let me let the applicant talk a little bit. I'm sorry, not talk.
Sorry,
let me
yeah,
get
yeah, no,
them.
no,
That's
you're
okay.
right,
That's
you're
okay.
right.
Let me get the applicant to talk. Just state your name and your address. Both of you can do it together.
This is Carol Hunter. Her name's on top. I'm at Weir, Donald Hunter.
Okay.
We live at 588 Oak Plains Road, Clarksville, Tennessee right now. Basically, this house, I have been part owner of it since 1985, approximately.
I bought it in 71 or 72.
It was purchased back then, and obviously that value paid at that point doesn't realistically reflect the value of the house today. But the problem we have is, as of 2010, after the flood, that house is built below the street level. The water rushed in and pounded the foundation. I discussed it with my son, and he said prior to the flood, water ran through the basement. Water has run through that basement since probably the day it was built. But now it floods, and during the big flood, it flooded, knee deep. And every time we have a big rain, now it floods again and keeps flooding. Obviously the damage was done, and I do not know the extent of the damage.
I'd like to say, I'll be 73 next month. And my husband has been unemployed for over 2.5 years. That's our situation. We're living in my mother-in-law's house, which has no stairs. That's great. And she's dead.
And my mom passed last year. So.
When we sell this house, we will pay his brothers for the house in which we're now living.
So
this is very much a hardship situation.
It's not perhaps a hardship by definition of what you're saying, but for us, frankly, I don't have any way to repair this house.
Yeah, we can't possibly.
So that's about all I've got to say. How about you?
Well, it's very simple. If the decision goes against us, then I will pay the taxes. By the way, the Davidson County Assessor of Property assessed the total appraised value at $275,000 because of the location. It's the location that's valuable, not the house. And I'll try to pay the taxes, and then, of course, the place will gradually fall apart and become a slum. And I can't live there.
Shall we? I think we're done.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you. Any questions to the applicant?
I have one.
Yeah.
Sir, I'm sorry. What are your intentions with the house? You do not intend to move into it?
My son is living in it today. They are preparing to move out of it because the engineer came in and pointed out that, in fact, the house is becoming unsafe to live in.
They called it dangerous.
But your intent is just to sell the property?
Sell it, yes. One way or another, we're going to have to sell it.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, let's start all over here. I'm trying to understand what the economic hardship is. Tell me what the economic hardship of this house is.
I believe that it's probably going to cost more to repair it than it's worth. I don't have proof of that, I confess.
But I think part of the evidence is that we've got figures that say the opposite of that.
Correct, I understand.
So are you suggesting those are not accurate, or that you just don't?
I believe they don't necessarily reflect the truth once you dig in.
So what you're wanting to do is to have us approve the economic hardship, let you tear it down and sell it as a lot?
Right.
Okay, I'm just trying to get all this now.
Excuse me, we paid $400. I have the receipt with me this year trying to fix the roof so it would stop leaking. I didn't know at that time. We've been in Vermont for 11 years, but his mother was dying, and we came back. And it was still leaking after $400. We paid this year. Sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Is your position that if you tried to sell it as it is, and you can't?
I have a suspicion that as is, it cannot be sold.
Yes.
Unless I find someone who's just willing to pay for it no matter what. I believe that the house is dangerous.
Dangerous?
What you're telling us is that, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, the economic hardship in your mind, I believe, has been caused by structural damage as a result of the flood.
That was when it happened, I'm convinced. Because prior to that, we did not have the same conditions that occur today.
I'm just trying to understand the case here.
I'll be honest, I was discussing it with my son, and he said prior to the flood in 2010, and the basement did flood in that house, even though we're not anywhere near a body of water, basically because the house is set back down a hill. And when the water comes off, specifically other, the road and everything, it just runs right into that very corner of the house, and I believe it has undermined the foundation there because the flooding has grown much worse.
All right, and you have, there are documents in this package that are from engineers and an architect, I believe,
Yes.
that state that it would not be prudent to repair or remediate the structure.
That's correct.
So that is evidence of your position.
I hope so.
Another engineer told him that it was dangerous. He used the word dangerous.
It's the same
one.
document.
Oh, I'm sorry.
They have the document in hand.
Forgive me. I'm sorry. I'm just so depressed.
So the home has always had some problems with water? And in the big flood we had a few years back, it was only compounded
The
by
dam
that?
burst, so to speak.
Okay.
Prior to that, water ran through the basement of the house to the point where that they had put a little something to route it to the drain.
I got you.
That's the way it was when I got there. But now, whenever we have a fairly large rain event, it floods.
I understand.
Badly.
Okay.
But have you tried to sell it as is?
At this point, no.
But
I
you think you can sell it as a piece of property? You think you've got somebody lined up to buy it as a piece of property?
Yes.
And that's why you want a hardship? That's one of the reasons why, it may be unrelated, but...
Basically, we've been
May I?
I might. We were here a month ago, as you know, and yes, I have someone to buy the property. I, as I say, don't have any way to remediate the house. To sell it for $115,000 to me is not, that goes against everything I know about real estate and property. Whether they take it and fix it or whatever, I can't do that. That's unrealistic for the amount of money I have spent on that house to keep it up and running, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't make sense to me to sell that house for $115,000.
So I guess the next question is, how much can you sell it as a lot?
I have an offer for $240,000 as it said, which is frankly probably a lot less than it's actually worth. It's basically a situation of I don't have any way to prepare the house.
May I speak?
Go ahead.
What happened, he went by himself there, and he met with this person who had constructed another place that he had kept the look of it in the front, and he had just done an add-on, and it had come out nicely, and he thought he was going to be able to do that with this house. And then he had his own engineer come in and have a look, and that's when they found out. The man said dangerous, it's so bad that the foundation and so forth, and that changed everything, because that meant that he was going to have to spend a huge amount of money himself just to get it to where it would be, safe to live in. And anyway, so really,
Shall we?
It'd be better to just start all over again.
Any more questions to the applicant? Okay. All right, thank you very much. Okay, open public hearing. Would anyone like to speak about the project? Yeah. Just state your name and your address.
Hi, my name is Doug Revere, and I am in fact the person who is under contract currently for the house. The contract value is $240,000, as we talked about. I wonder if just to spend 2 minutes, because there is a lot of confusion about how we ended up where we end up. I wanted to do just a 1-minute chronology so we can make sure that we get the timeline right. We do have a structural observation report dated June the 8th, which is in your packet, which is where the initial report from the structural engineer was that there's so much degradation it would be unwise and unsafe to try to repair the home. We did then meet with staff and the structural engineer on the site, and of course to follow the protocol of this process, you need a more detailed structural report. That structural report is also included in your packet. That is dated June the 24th. That details the specific areas of degradation and breaks it down into very specific detail, but the conclusion is the same. The final paragraph of that structural report states exactly the same, which is this should not be undertaken because of the damage. Even if you tried to lift the house up to a point where you could rebuild the foundation from scratch, the connections with the framing are so degraded over time through movement and through water damage that it is a completely unsafe and unwise practice to try to do that. Of course, again, as part of this process, you need to have numbers. So we did try to get numbers from two folks, one of which the letter is in there from Martin Construction Company, says it would be committing malpractice as a general contractor to attempt to repair this home to get it into structural repair because of the degradation. We also had the opinion of Manuel Zeitlin of Zeitlin Architects, which matches that same opinion. But again, to withstand the rigors of this process, we did in fact now get a bid of $115,000 to do the repairs, just to get it so the house is safe and stable. I'll just ask as a rhetorical question, but there's no human being in their right mind that would invest, if you just look at this picture, invest $115,000 in the foundation to repair that home. It's illogical, and it can't and won't happen. But as it pertains to the economic hardship for the hunters, you know, the difference between the $115,000 appraisal that has come in, that's simply an appraiser who sees, look, I've got a $240,000 offer, and yes, but for the structural degradation, that is a fair price for that home. And then he sees a bid for $115,000 for the structural repairs, and he reduces the appraisal by that amount. And we're all hanging our hats on the fact that it's exactly $115,000 as an appraised value. It's exactly $115,000 in construction costs. And therefore, if you add those two together and you've got a $240,000 offer, and I hear you, may I continue? I was the applicant last time. I wonder if I could just get another minute or two, just 1 minute? 30 seconds. 30 seconds. So
30 seconds, I'm sorry.
Okay, so the idea that a general contractor who saw the structural engineer's report, went on site and reviewed in general what it would take to review this, and to have it come at $115,000, it's a guess, right? No one in their right minds has any idea what's going to happen when you uncover that foundation. I, as the owner of the property next door, found this out when I rebuilt the foundation next door. There is an enormous amount of water that comes down that hill. No one in their right mind, no one knows for sure what's going to happen when you try to repair that foundation. We have structural engineers who have suggested and asked us not to do it because of the potential for collapse. In its current condition, the house is in horrible shape. It will collapse eventually. That is in the report, and you can see that.
Okay.
For all these reasons, I respectfully request approval of the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak about this project? Okay.
Chairman, if I may, legal has advised me to let you know that the definition for economic hardship is italicized. So you lawfully have the right not to follow that, but that is what you have followed since the 1980s.
Okay, thank you. The part on page 8, right, okay, of our parking. Okay. Discussion?
Mr. Chair, could I just state, since I came in late, I feel like I should probably abstain from this case.
Okay.
Thanks.
I had kind of cut you off before. I don't know if you want to finish your thought.
Speaking out of turn. What I guess, after hearing everything and thinking about it and having read this in advance, I think the formula is pretty straightforward. If the italicized language shows that that's how we've done it for the last 20 or 30 years, we have third-party figures that show that 115 plus 115 is less than 240. It's really close. So from there, I would lean and be comfortable saying this is something that you would disapprove because the numbers just don't support economic hardship. I do get, however, caught up on the language in the Keith Garman's structural engineers report that says it's risky to attempt to stabilize the residents while the foundation work is completed. So for me, I think I'm willing to make an exception to that rule, because just because you can do it, it may not be safe to actually put human beings under there to do it. And if that's the case, I don't want to encourage anything like that. And that's what I'm kind of reading from his report. I'm not looking for a way out, because I hear everything. They're talking about their personal circumstances, but the standard doesn't consider that stuff. It's about the property, not the individual. So I'm empathetic, but it doesn't factor into the equation, or you really can't. But I am comfortable relying on a safety issue that just because you could pay someone to do it, it's not a good idea. And I think it's different for the structural engineer to say it's not prudent financially. I don't even think his opinion's that relevant. I think I would look for a contractor or maybe an appraiser to say what the value would be once you're done. But I do think the structural engineer has a lot to say about whether it's appropriate to put people under there to actually try to lift the foundation and the whole thing crumbles on them. So I don't know if that's exactly what he's saying, but he seems to be implying it. So that's kind of where I am.
Okay. Go ahead.
We always have the right as commissioners, just like judges in court do, to bring to the table common sense. So in interpreting all these papers, we bring to the floor our common sense. And my common sense tells me that once they get in there and start looking around or digging up the structure, whatever they have to do, there's going to be more they're going to find in this place. And those numbers to the cost of repairs are going to go up. That's what my common sense tells me. And I believe there is an economic hardship here that requires that we vote to demolish this building.
Go ahead.
I concur with Rose and Aaron both. And also, if you'll look under 17.40420D, number 2, they have documented very thoroughly the problems with the structure from some very prominent professionals in this city. And, I'll concur with Rose again. I think it comes down to common sense. We would like to save everything we can, but if it's not savable, let's do something better with it instead of just watch it die.
I have a question, and maybe clarification for staff and legal, and that is, the application is made purely for demolition, and then the staff has, they've provided some evidence. They don't specifically apply for a demolition permit based on any particular guideline. In other words, this isn't submitted under 3B2C necessarily. It's just submitted as an application for demolition.
I'm not sure I'm following what you're asking.
Kind of more of a legal.
Are you asking, was it submitted as an economic hardship case, and therefore that's the only thing that you can look at?
I am asking.
Okay. Or is the application for demolition, and that's just one of the things that you consider?
Exactly the question.
Right.
We looked at both things. The first question to answer is it historic or not? Because if it's not historic, it's an easy agreement to let it be torn down. Staff found that it is historic, so then the only other option is to go to economic hardship. Did that answer your question? Okay.
In light of that question, and I'm looking at what does make sense, and then what's the law? What do we have to follow here? One of the questions that I've raised in between this, going around about the specific numbers, which that's one way to go about it, is if I recall in adding this section of the neighborhood to the district, and even having community members get up and speak about the nature of the homes in this portion, which is near the edge of the district and the edge of the period of historical significance, is that I don't have any other way to describe them. I don't want to say tenuous exactly, but we're right at a transitional point, and it's hard to find black and white in these issues. And I think because we're nearing the end of historical significance, not that this isn't worthy of saving, but what I find myself wondering about is the historical significance of this structure enough that we want to save it, or is it a fear of what might come in its place that we're responding to? And that's not I'm not sure that that's relevant to this case. And what I wonder is that in also considering 3B2A, which states if a building or major portion of a building has irretrievably lost its architectural and historical integrity and significance, that's a question that I certainly have in the evidence that's been presented. Certainly not as in its appearance from the street, but as a structure considered in its totality. That, to me, also plays into the equation in addition to the case that's been presented in the numbers in item C. That guideline does go on to say, and its removal will result in a more historically appropriate visual effect on the district. That's a tough one to try to weigh in this case, is that it's not as if it's an eyesore to the district. If it's left derelict, certainly it might become, but that would be not an issue of historic preservation as much as it would be an issue of habitation. So that's a little further analysis from my perspective.
Well, just to echo that a little bit, I believe it is, from what I've heard, I believe it is more so an issue of habitation. And it is my hope, I know that we all have opinions as designers and architects and landscape architects, this and that. And it's not appropriate to say what good or bad architecture is, but I would hope that the replacing structure would be highly scrutinized by this commission under the overlay, and it would be an improvement to the neighborhood. That's my assumption, which is not a smart thing to do or say, but that's what I would hope.
Any more comments from any of the commissioners? And if not, can we get a motion?
Yeah, I'll second that. It's a motion to approve the demolition.
Yes.
Okay. I just like that. I think it's.
So you're amending the?
No.
Okay.
I'm seconding it and sort of based on the structural damage, primarily the structural damage to the property that it sustained. And based on the applicant's testimony, it was predominantly during the flood.
Okay. I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Motion carries. Motion carries. It is approved to be demolished. Okay, next one is 1504 Sweetbriar Avenue.
All right, this is a 1504 Sweetbriar Avenue. This is a two-story frame house with a hipped roof. It was constructed circa 1910. It has clapboard siding on the first story and shingle siding on the second. And I'd say it has a mixture of architectural features from a few architectural styles, primarily transitional Victorian shingle style and colonial revival features as well. Next slide. It has a two-story porte cochere on the left that is not original, but appears to be a very early addition, which would not be uncommon as a porte cochere would coincide with the rise in the popularity of cars in the first quarter of the 20th century. And the upper story of that porte cochere appears to be a sleeping porch, which is another popular addition to houses done in the 19-teens and 20s. There's also a two-story right addition on the house. And although these additions are not original, because of their age and the association with important trends in the development of the neighborhood, automobiles, sleeping porches, staff finds that the porte cochere has acquired historic significance in its own right. Next slide. So the current application would be to enclose the existing porte cochere on the left side of the house. The columns at the corners would be eliminated, and the enclosure would be sided to match the walls of the first story of the house. The front wall would have a pair of double-hung windows and a central door. And I wrote in your staff recommendations that it was a panel door because the drawing wasn't labeled and otherwise, and it looked to be a panel door. I've since learned that the applicants would like to use a glass door there. Next slide. The side elevation would have a single window with a diamond light pattern. Also, siding to match the existing structure, and corner boards where the columns are now. One more. Although the Belmont-Hillsborough design guidelines don't specifically address the enclosure of porte cocheres, staff applied the guidelines for enclosing side porches. Porch enclosure guidelines have been used previously on reviewing the enclosure of a porte cochere. Most recently, to my mind at least, a case I reviewed at 3823 Whitland Avenue. The guidelines in this overlay, but for that one as well, allow for porch enclosure if the addition is constructed in such a way that the original form and openings of the porch remain visible and undisturbed. And the Commission has consistently interpreted this to mean an enclosure primarily of glass, windows or doors with minimal framing that retains the original column arrangement, and general opening size can be appropriate. Low bulkheads or knee walls have also been approved, sort of just required for framing. But substantial enclosures with clapboard or bricked-in walls have not been approved. These are examples, the one on Whitland Avenue and another in Cherokee Park. The one on the left, a porte cochere. The one on the right is actually just a side porch that has been enclosed. I guess there's one more slide there, and that's... So the amount of glass in the doorway doesn't necessarily change the conclusion of staff's recommendation because the porch enclosure overall is not appropriate. Staff finds that the enclosure of the porte cochere would disrupt the form and appearance of the structure significantly, and that doing so does not meet Design Guideline 2B2C for additions. Additionally, the enclosure of the historically open space with such a solid and opaque material doesn't meet Design Guideline 2B1D and G for windows and openings and materials. Staff recommends disapproval of the application, finding it does not meet the design guidelines for the Belmont-Hillsborough Neighborhood Conservation Zoning Overlay.
Any questions to staff?
Is it really more the design, Sean, or is it both?
Both. It's the concept. It's probably deeper than the design itself.
But it is things we've approved if it was more of a sunroom, more glass open thing.
Yes.
So we're basically talking about the amount of transparency on the facades.
Well, and the form. Here it has 3 columns on the corner. Mm-hmm. You can probably see it better in your site plan or the floor plan. 3 columns and then a column up against the wall. I don't know if it's engaged or if that may be a pilaster. But those are being removed. and it'll be frame walls with corner boards. So the columniation, I think that's how it's pronounced, the arrangement of columns, the intercolumniation, which is the space between columns, all that gets disrupted and replaced with a wall. So that's a form that we find inappropriate.
So those are the two overriding factors, the columns and the transparency on the facades. Okay.
Can you go to the Whitland Avenue? Yeah. So that was a porte cochere. It certainly looks like an original porte cochere that had sort of a Gothic arch that connected it to the rest of the primary structure. In that enclosure, which I don't think has actually ever been done, but it was approved, they fitted windows into that Gothic arch. So the form of the columns, the form and the columns were retained with glass in the open spaces between, which would be appropriate here.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Sean. Would the applicant like to come forward and please state your name and address?
Good afternoon. My name is Kim Sabatini. I'm the owner of 1504 Sweetbriar. If I may, I've handed out a letter of support that was recently given to me. And if I may, I'd like to read from it. I believe it pretty much voices my interpretations of the guidelines and the concerns of the project not being approved the way it currently is. I believe that the planned project meets the design guidelines, especially considering that the existing addition is not original to the historic house, and because the historic Hillsborough design guidelines allow for side additions for lots wider than 60 feet. The lot at 1504 Sweetbriar Avenue stretches 100 feet along Sweetbriar Avenue. If constructed today, the existing addition on the house's western side would likely meet the guidelines for a side addition, regardless of whether the first story exhibited opaque cladding. I question whether the existing addition is so historically pristine as to warrant the staff's recommended limits to alteration. I do not feel as though it unequivocally exhibits historic significances in its own right. The Nashville Rooms 1931 update of Sanborn's fire insurance map show that the addition at 1504 Sweetbriar was constructed after 1931 and not in the 20s as the staff recommendation implies. Also, if the roof at the west side addition was altered in the 1980s, it seems likely that the addition may have also experienced alterations prior to that point. The present proposal limits physical impact to the historic structure, which I believe preferable to large rear additions that routinely receive recommendations for approval in the Belmont Hillsborough neighborhood. At 2076 Belmont Boulevard, a recent construction project gutted the structure, replaced all windows, bricked over a recessed arched opening at the front facade, and attached a large 2.5-story rear addition with an inset less than 6 inches. It struck me that the project was met with staff recommendation of approval and that the front archway, characterized as non-original, was approved for removal. It also struck me that the small alteration at 1504 Sweetbriar Avenue, being much more minuscule in scale and precise in placement, embodies a far more considerate preservation ethic, yet it has been met with staff recommendation for disapproval. I feel that in focusing too heavily upon informal policies and italicized portions of the guidelines, it is possible to substantially stray from the original intent of the actual guidelines as well as basic reasonability. I am concerned that if the Commission supports the staff recommendation of disapproval, it will encourage the misinterpretation of the guidelines and overemphasize the implications of precise Commission decisions, which are often based on unique buildings and site conditions. Finally, the proposed construction project of 1504 Sweetbriar does not endanger the home's listing as a contributing structure in the Belmont Hillsborough National Register District. Once again, it is my opinion that the proposed project of 1504 Sweetbriar attends to the architectural character of Bilmont Hillsborough according to the guidelines and meets accepted preservation standards, especially considering the unique characteristics of the lot and house, as well as taking into account the special allowances for its side additions.
Anything else?
There's a second page which
Yeah, we can.
I'm going to read it, but it shows other options.
Yeah, we can read it. I think. Any questions to the applicant, or was there anything else you wanted to state?
I think it highlights as well the fact that I'm trying to do a very small addition, and these old homes don't have very much storage, and I'm trying to do a basic mudroom, which with an all-glass facility doesn't really give you the privacy and what I'm looking for in a mudroom. I also think from my perspective, and I've lived in a lot of historical homes, to me looking at the structure from the street with all glass, my eye would go to that structure and think, wow, that's strange, why is it all glass? Rather than look at a request that I'm putting in for a door which replicates the original door to the main building, which actually looks through to the garden, so it gives it an open feel. It's straddled by two large windows that you would find around the rest of the house. And it's the opaque covering would be the wooden siding that you would find on the rest of the home. So to me, I'm surprised that it wasn't approved, because it seems like such a small project, and it looks from the street that it would have been there all along. And again, the fact that the porte cochere is not original to the property, and the guidelines, because of the side additions for lots wider than 60 feet. The structure itself is going through some subsidence. The columns have all rotted, so whatever happens, I have to replace the columns. The structure to the far right of that, where it borders the neighbor, has dropped, so that foundation will have to be done soon. So those columns have to be replaced irrespective if this is not approved. The other side of the property, I don't believe there are any pictures, but I think the addition was done at the same time as the porte cochere. And I don't know if we have any pictures on record, but there's a little bit more elaboration on the trim than I have requested. They've added wider white plank boards on the edges of the building to kind of reflect pillars, and I would be totally amiable to doing that, so that there would be some symmetry to both sides of the home. That's really all I have to say.
Okay. Any questions? Further follow-up questions to the applicant? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, open public hearing. Would anyone like to speak about this project? Yep. Please come forward, state your name. You have 2 minutes. And address.
Hi, I'm Doug Revere. As it happens, I own the property at 1507 Sweetbriar, which is directly across the street from this property. And our front door, in essence, this photo was taken from the front door of the property that I own. And I stand in favor of the application. I think that, and this picture does not do justice, this is a beautiful, elegant, gorgeous home in the historic district. And to put the glass, to use the glass enclosure, I think would frankly degrade from the overall historic and structural, the historic architectural integrity of this gorgeous home. And I would prefer, as the person who will look at it most, I'm the owner, I don't live there, but I'm the owner, I would support and approve the proposed plan, which I think is a much more elegant and architecturally pleasing solution to his request. So I stand in favor of the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, close public hearing. Discussion? Staff, have you, I know you just got this, but I guess from the letter, and you just got it, so I know you hadn't had a chance to look at it, about the addition not being original, or not being what you had described it to be. I'm sorry.
We don't have the 1931 Sanborn update in our office, so I haven't been there to see exactly what that looks like and find out what else that suggests. Sometimes additions weren't always shown the first year. Maybe it was constructed just as the Sanborn map was being done. I don't want to speculate too much on that.
Would an addition, would it change your opinion if the addition were dated 1930s or as stated in the recommendation?
I think an addition, perhaps, I think it's very likely that an addition in the 1930s, I would still find to meet the Standard 5 of the Secretary of Interior standards for treatment of historic properties. It says additions that have acquired significance in their own right should be retained.
As would I.
It still speaks of the same significant periods of development, the rise of the automobile. That's same thing.
Any other discussion?
Can I ask the applicant something? See,
Sure.
please. I'm somewhat sympathetic of your proposal. I do think that this element is pushed pretty far back from the front of the house, so it doesn't read like the ones that maybe we saw in the slides, so there may be some leniency there.
Could you go to the full elevation again?
But I guess probably what, I was wondering if you would be amenable to at least having the columns show in some capacity. I know you talked about replacing them, but if there was a way to incorporate those columns in your facade and, in some way, I think to me personally, that's probably the thing that I want to see the most in any kind of design you have.
Well, as I said, you can just barely see the sunroom poking through the trees on the right-hand side. That, when that was built, you can just about make out the broad white trim, and it has a lot of detail at the top, replicating a column, of a flat column, not a cylindrical column. So as I said, I would be totally amenable to that. I don't know, if I had to choose between having an all-glass structure and having the ability to have more of a facade that I'm requesting by adding the look of a column on the side, I guess I would be willing to do that, absolutely. I mean, I'm all about preserving the historical side of this house. I'm very proud of it, and I don't want to destroy it. But at the same time, we move forward with society, and we have to adapt our houses so that they work for us as well. And I don't see how a fully open glass structure will benefit anybody from an aesthetic perspective and from a functional perspective. So yes, I'm absolutely amenable to adding whatever historical value to it to make it more appeasable to the Commission.
That's just my view.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
In terms of whether this is permitted or could be added, certainly I think the guidelines permit this if it were not here today, if it weren't what it were. Because of the way this has been interpreted and this commission has approved it in the past, I think that it's a porte cochere. It was built as a porte cochere. If you enclose it, it doesn't read as a porte cochere anymore. So that I'm having a little trouble with. If you just adding columns to something that wouldn't read as a porte cochere any longer, not necessarily an improvement. I think it may be a muddy compromise to what I think we based some decisions on. And I'll say in this case, it's not as if enclosing it is something that we've denied or that we'd deny the applicant use of that as enclosed space. It's more in the manner in which it's done. And I think, we make those decisions on just about every case, and it is about the details and the manner in which it's done. And in the past, specifically some of the more recent cases that the staff has cited, I think, in my opinion, if you look back at those cases, it's pretty apparent to see, even though there's glass infill, what the form was, the historical timeline that it exists, on the house, and that it is enclosed. At one time, if that were moved, it would stand on its own as reading as porte cochere.
Any other discussion?
Could you go back to the image, the two examples that have been done or have been approved? I thought it was interesting on the Mockingbird Road example, which is a completely different style house, of course, but that the percentage of glass is probably less than what's being proposed here. It appears as a sort of a glass system, and maybe it's as much about what the siding material is, along with the glass, especially if there's a glass door in there. So I don't know, maybe a question for staff. Given the style of the structure and the materials, would there be a more appropriate solution that to sort of the infill material with the lap siding? I don't know if there would necessarily, because it's a completely different style house than the Mockingbird Road example. But it seems to be, relatively transparent on the front facade, with the large windows consistent with the rest of the house and the glass door. And then again, if you go back, I would hope if we were to approve this with the columns, that we would be asking the applicant to include columns that are more representative of what was originally there than what's there currently, which these are smaller columns. Appears to be a double column on the left, where I think the original structure or the original porte cochere appeared to have just a single column on the corners. And they were ionic columns. So given, I guess, what the staff showed as examples, I kind of feel like there's probably a solution that could express the columns, could express this as sort of an infill panel or facade that maintains the amount of transparency that's there now, and it may just be a simple matter of design and materials.
I can maybe address that a little bit. We agree completely. I think there's several different options. We did talk to the applicant, provided some of these examples, but they wanted to ask you about this design here today.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Robin. Okay. So do we, any more discussion, or can we get a motion? And I think, just to restate what Robin said, so this design is what they want to put forward. The applicant mentioned what he'd be willing to do, but that's, we want to make sure that that's what we're actually making our motion on.
I'll move for disapproval of the application for 1504 Sweetbriar Avenue to enclose the porte cochere as presented. It loses its integrity as a porte cochere, and based on the guidelines is particularly item 5 in the standard 4 and the Secretary of Interior Standards would be violated.
Okay, do I have a second? Second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, all right. Disapproved. Next one is 2601 Belmont Boulevard.
2601 Belmont Boulevard is situated at the corner of Belmont and Sweetbriar Avenue. Last month, the Commission approved the demolition of the existing garage and the existing addition and the construction of a new addition. The Commission last month denied the proposed garage and a second-story connector between the house and the garage. The applicant has resubmitted new designs for the garage and the second-story connector. Staff is recommending approval of the garage with the condition that the Skyway connector be eliminated. Next slide. So here's the site plan. The garage will be located at the back of the property and will be accessed via Sweetbriar Avenue. Base zoning requires that a side setback of 10 feet be on the Sweetbriar Avenue side, and the base zoning requires a rear setback of 3 feet. The applicant is proposing to locate the garage 5 feet from the side property line, which will match the line of the existing house. And the garage is proposed to be just 2 feet from the alley. So again, it's 5 feet from Sweetbriar, but base zoning says 10 feet from Sweetbriar. Base zoning says 3 feet from the alley, and the applicant's proposing 2 feet from the alley. Staff finds the proposed location and setback reduction to be appropriate in this instance because this site has a precedent for an outbuilding that sits close to the property line. You can see the outline of that in the hatch marks on the site plan. And because the new outbuilding will be further away from the property lines than the existing garage. Next slide. Here are the floor plans. The proposed garage is approximately 24 feet by 26 feet. The floor plans illustrate that the garage will be attached to the house with a Skyway connector. The connector is 4 feet wide and 11 feet 2 inches long. Next slide. Here's the roof plan. The garage's roof form will be hipped to match the historic house, and staff finds that to be appropriate. Next slide. Here are the side elevations. The garage will be 2 stories with an eave height of 18 feet and a ridge height of 26 feet 9 inches. The garage will be over 9 feet shorter than the historic house and is subordinate to it. The side elevations show the 2-story balcony connector between the house and the addition. The bottom of the Skyway connector will be approximately 14 feet 9 inches above grade, and the top of the rail for the Skyway will be just under 18 feet above grade. The design guidelines require that outbuildings should, quote, reflect the character of the period of the house, unquote, and should be compatible with the surrounding historic outbuildings. There are no instances of buildings in the district being connected by Skyways. Moreover, the second-story Skyway connecting the house to the garage is not something that was seen historically and is not something the Commission has approved in the past in this district. When the Commission has approved connectors between a house and an outbuilding, the connections have been made on the ground floor and have appeared to be landscape features like a pavilion or a pergola. This connector will, in essence, create a 2-story attachment to a 2-story garage. The design guidelines state that the attached garages, which we are arguing will be in the sense instead of attached to the second story, the design guidelines state that attached garages are only appropriate when vehicular entry is at the basement level and the garage doors are on the rear, and this application does not meet either of those 2 standards. The proposed garage does not meet either of those standards. Further, because the site is a corner lot, the connector will be highly visible and will be out of character for the district. Staff recommends disapproval of the Skyway connector. And next slide. Here are the rear elevations of the garage, and also on the right is the rear elevation of the house, which was redesigned since last month, since the connector has been redesigned since last month. The proposed materials include hardy plank lap siding and hardy panel, brick foundation, Marvin integrity windows, and a cable railing. Next slide. And here is a 3D rendering of the proposed garage and the addition, which was approved last month by the Commission. In conclusion, staff recommends approval of the outbuilding and the setback reduction with the following conditions. 1, the Skyway connector be eliminated. 2, staff review and approve the door materials and specifications. And 3, the lap siding have a maximum reveal of 5 inches. I believe the applicant is here, but I'm happy to answer any questions before he comes up.
All right, any questions, staff?
The architecture of the garage.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that compatible with other outbuildings in the neighborhood?
It's more contemporary than what we traditionally see or what is typically put forward, but we did find that the roof form, the materials are materials we've approved in the past for both additions and for outbuildings. we found that it met the design guidelines. Even though it is more contemporary, the design guidelines do state that contemporary designs are encouraged so long as the form and the massing and the scale and all of the major entities meet the historic context. And the staff, believes it does.
All right. Any more questions? Okay, thanks, Melissa. Would the applicant like to come forward? State your name and address.
Manuel Zeitlin, Architects, 516 Hagen Street. So last month when we were here, if you remember, the garage was a much bigger, taller structure, and the reason for that was trying to deal with the two-story connector, where the owners mentioned, some of you weren't here last time, that they're constantly on the road. That's why they're not here today. They're both in sales and travel, and they're both in consulting. So the idea of being able to walk from their master bedroom across to their garage building down to their cars is really a unique sort of situation to their own personal need, their lifestyle needs, that it would be a great, just sort of convenience for them to be able to do that. And I met with Tim Walker and Melissa, I think, to talk about, what were the concerns about the connector. And Tim said the biggest concern he felt like the board had was that they're worried about he was worried about the connectors driving the height of an outbuilding, that if you're trying to align with the second floor of a house and the connector ends up driving that form of the building, that's what it was concerned about. Also in the original design, we were using that connector as like a second floor deck in a sense, so it was about 12 feet wide, I think, or 11 feet wide. So in this design, we've reduced it to 4 feet. We've set it back further from the road, so like you even see in this is a perspective from the other side of the street. You don't even see the connector. As you approach it, the same thing happens as you turn off of Belmont on the Beechwood or on the Sweetbriar. You don't see it either. So it's really a convenience thing. And what we did was we came across, and you can see it, I think, from the plan view maybe, but we came across and then we stepped down, I think, 3 or 4 steps. There in that section, you can see it, which is why the roof carves away in that back corner. But so that it was no longer driving the height of that outbuilding. So we've tried to basically minimize it. In effect, it also gives them a covered walkway to go from their first floor kitchen living space to the garage to, so you have a covered way to carry groceries in the house. If you took the cable rails off, you basically have a covered connector, and so we used cable rails as the most minimal way to provide some, protection for walking across it. But it's in our mind, we try to minimize it as much as possible, make it as low impact from the street as possible, and stay with the intent of the guidelines, which is that the outbuilding is clearly subservient to the main house, and we felt that connector was far enough back and small enough that it really wouldn't have an effect.
Questions? Okay. Thanks. Okay, thanks. Okay, open public hearing. Would anyone like to speak regarding this project? State your name and address, and everyone please limit yourself for 2 minutes.
I'm Lindsay Moffitt. I live at 2402 Belmont Boulevard, and I'm here on behalf of Belmont Hillsborough Neighborhood Association. We support staff's recommendation of disallowing the connector. The other concern we have is with the garage setback reduction, particularly as it faces Sweetbriar. I know the setback reduction, when it was done at zoning, you had to have a hardship to gain that setback. That is not the case in Belmont Hillsborough because of our uniqueness of the placement of the original houses. However, we're removing an old garage, and we have the opportunity to come into compliance with the setback. I think the biggest concern is danger to pedestrians. When you're just set 5 feet back from the sidewalk, you can't back out of your garage and have a clear vision of someone coming down the street. There is a bus stop at this street. Children come down the street in the morning to catch the bus to go to school. It's also on an alleyway where Metro Public Works has big trucks that come out and pick up garbage. That, again, is at 7 in the morning when children are walking to school. And I would like to ask staff if they have run this by Public Works, the traffic engineer, Ali Afis, or Rory Rowan. And if they think it's okay, then we'll be okay with it. But I would just like to raise that flag to have them okay the setback as far as pedestrian safety.
Okay, thank you. Are there others?
Good afternoon. My name is Don O'Donnelly, and I own the property immediately adjacent at 2603 Belmont Boulevard. So I think I have appropriate standing. First, I'd like to offer to you Exhibit 1, which I did some analysis. I think one of the problems that the neighborhood, myself, applicants, you have, is, and staff, I might add, is how do you judge what is precedent and appropriate in a setting in this neighborhood. We witnessed today we've got 9 cases out of 16 in front of you. We might call this the Belmont Hillsborough Board for that. But I looked at Metro property maps. Every property from Blair to Ferguson, which is the residential stretch on Belmont, less than half the properties even have an outbuilding. Of those that do, less than a fourth are more than one story, some of which are historically more than one, not modern. There's no precedent in the block of the 2600s for a 26.9 foot tall accessory. There are only 4 accessory structures, one of which is proposed to be demolished. I have one adjacent, which is not but 1 story. They're all 1 story. There are no 2-story on either side of Belmont in this block face, nor at the northeast or southeast corner across Belmont, nor at the corner of Sweetbriar. They're all, there's no accessory structure across Belmont. At Oakland and Sweetbriar, it is a 1-story. Having said that, design is, as Mr. Champion noted, a question of judgment. And I think when this body should be looking at design, the design element they're looking at is to add to this neighborhood, to its preservation. It's not to accommodate the wishes or lifestyles or complaints of neighbors. It's to focus on that historical element. So any decisions I think you make should be guided by that. Now, having said that, with great reluctance, because we have a great lawyer sitting here, I'll go to point 2 and say that having reviewed state statute, I do not believe that this board has the authority under case law to grant variances.
Excuse me 1 second. We wrap up in about 15 seconds.
Not a problem.
Okay.
State statutes specifically do not give authority to local governments to delegate variances to historical boards. It's the Board of Zoning Appeals. And the case law in dicta, and it is dicta, this would be a case of first impression, hold that without delegation, there is no authority. Last, I would just say, if you look at A5 and A11 of the plans submitted, the building is displayed with 2 windows in one instance, 4 in the other. I think that needs to be resolved. And finally, the minimum setback is 3 feet. Nothing about this from the alley, nothing about this design requires it to sit at 2 feet. It is a maintenance nightmare, and I would urge you to call on them to move it to 3.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Are there others? Okay, I'm going to close public hearing. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I have two questions. One question for staff, and then perhaps a question for the applicant. Is there anything in the guidelines that specifically requires or suggests that where alley access is provided, that garages should utilize the alley for accessing the garage?
What the guidelines state is that a garage should be in the appropriate location and should be accessed as historic garages are. So that's why we generally do require that they be approached from the alley. In this case, the existing garage had a bay on Sweetbriar. And so we thought that that would be appropriate, because to get it off the alley does push it further into the lot, because you've got to make that turn.
And there's other examples in the neighborhood of original outbuildings that
Facing the side
street on the corner.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to add to that, there are two additional, I don't think I have a photograph in this presentation, but there are two additional garages that face Sweetbriar just across the street from this one. They're just one bay. They're not two bays, but there are two separate one-bay garages across the street.
Are we meeting the setback requirement on Sweetbriar?
No, they are locating it 5 feet, and the base zoning says it should be 10 feet.
And do we have the, I know we do this periodically, do we have the authority to move from that setback?
We do. We have the ability to reduce setbacks. The commission, or you have the ability to reduce setbacks. And typically, we look at historic context, the site, the specifics of the site, what's there on the site now, and in this case, because there was an existing garage there, that does not meet the setbacks, and this is improving the situation. We felt that staff recommended approval of the setback reduction.
What's the base zoning of this lot? Any idea?
You mean how's it zoned? I don't remember. RSA, yeah, that's probably true, RSA.
Typically, I know in many historic districts, the base zoning is, these lots don't comply with the base zoning minimum requirements. I don't know if that's the case in this instance, but often we're wrestling with zoning issues that are applied without the benefit of the kind of real estate that the original guidelines were written around, and so therefore I think Metro has deemed it appropriate to grant that authority to us.
And I'm not sure if this is where you're headed, but I mean, it certainly is a struggle for us that the reason that you can reduce the setbacks is so that you can meet historic context. And certainly historically, garages, outbuildings were close to property lines, close to the back of the lot, close to a back corner. But I mean, it's certainly a valid point with these corner lots that there can be some safety issues, which we are not set up to review. We do not have that expertise to review. And that is a concern.
Agreed. I think in this case that one could argue, the existing side setback of the house, which does not meet the base zoning, this garage aligns with that. Rather than being arbitrary, it certainly aligns with the existing side setback of the property.
It's zoned R8, just to answer that question.
Did you have something in state legal?
Well, I was just going to add that your authority, instead of where it's referenced the Board of Zoning Appeals, it actually comes from TCA 13747, which talks about the relocation of items on various parcels. That's the driving force behind Metro Code 174410, subsection C5, which says the appropriateness of the maximum size of buildings and structures on a lot at the buildable area within which a building can be located, including setbacks and height. So that authority is in existence for this board, and it's slightly different than what the BZA actually exercises.
Thank you. Go ahead, Rose.
Well, I was going to ask the staff to address this 5-foot setback because the representative of the Belmont Neighborhood Association brought it up, and I was wondering if you looked at the potential for safety issues there with this 5-foot setback. I mean, can you address that? We sort of already have, and I'm sorry to come in second.
It is a little bit beyond our expertise, to address safety issues. That's and we to respond to the neighborhood representative's question. I did not speak with Public Works. I do believe that they need to get approval from Public Works to extend the curb cut, but we did not speak with them. So, we were looking at, when we recommended approval for the setback, just the precedent on the site, and also the fact that the garage was lining up with the line of the house. So we, we did have concerns. Originally, the garage was placed closer to the street, and we did have safety concerns then, but we really don't have the capability to assess the safety of a 5-foot setback in this case.
Does Public Works have to look at this first then?
Do you know, Rob? I'm not sure if they do.
We're not sure. There is an existing curb cut there, so they may not have to.
Do we have the authority to make sure they do review it? Do we have that kind of power? Since you've voiced a concern yourself about it.
We can certainly ask them. I mean, there's certainly no harm in asking. My guess is that they will say that the bulk zoning requirements are what they recommend, and that's why they're there.
Okay. Hunter, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to had a couple of things. One, throughout the urban environment, we have small setbacks. That's what makes a great urban environment. And while there are safety concerns, there's benefits to those concerns as well, in that generally cars slow down because it is, a little more, you have to be more cautionary. And so I don't really have a problem with the setback, especially that it's not arbitrary. It matches the existing house setback. Also, if you look at the photographs of the house, I don't know if it's in the slideshow or not, but on page 6, you can see that there's on-street parking on the street. There's a grass strip and a sidewalk, and then the setback to the house. And so there's quite a bit of room before you actually get to the drive lane. And I know there's the sidewalk, of course, and pedestrian safety is always a concern in the urban environment. But I don't have a problem with the setback variance. And I think the applicant has responded to our comments at the last hearing in significantly reducing the visual impact of the Skyway. If I recall, from the previous design, there was actually a walkway all the way around the upper floor, I think, of the garage, so it was very visible from the street. And as the applicant stated, this really just appears to be almost a covered connection, and has a minimal impact on the visual impact from the street and on the structure. To some degree, it feels like such a minute detail, especially given that it's been scaled back and it's set back way, sort of recessed way back from the existing build or from the new structures. And it's almost like picking apart what kind of trim they're doing around the window to me on a contemporary structure, which we generally don't do. So I'm prepared to support the application as it's submitted. But I do have one question for the applicant. In case the other commissioners don't necessarily agree with me, I'd like to ask the applicant to explain how you connect from the garage is there a covered path to get from the garage to the building at the ground level? And then that's one question. And then secondly, did you consider just simply bringing stairs down from the main structure and walking across to the garage. I'm not sure I see the benefit of having the upper floor connection, so if you could help me with that.
Sure. I mean, the connector is providing the covered walkway to the garage. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I guess looking at the plan, it was hard to tell with the...
So there's not a separate covered connector to the garage.
Right, but as you come out of the garage, there's stairs that go up to the left, right?
Those are inside the garage. Oh, that's inside the building. That's what takes you up to the second floor of the garage.
To the walkway? No, okay.
Yeah, can you go to
If we could go to the floor plan.
the floor plans? So Hunter, which ones?
So on the lower floor plan, sorry, I'm looking at the second floor plan. Okay, so on the first floor plan, as you come out of the garage, you're not, are you undercover?
No, we're not. We haven't. We'll need to move the door to really line up with that walkway to give us that.
So that was one question, and I was trying to understand and then from the upper floor, you come out and you go down.
So you're going down inside, and basically going downstairs behind the back of the garage. Inside, on the outside, you go out the door of that second floor space, down 5 steps, and then across to their bedroom. So basically, it's the way they can carry suitcases across, down, and to their cars without carrying the suitcases through their house. That's really what they're
down to the lower level.
Yeah.
Okay. And could that be accomplished by just bringing a stair down to grade outside?
From
the bedroom above, just on the main structure, just an outdoor stair?
It would just eat up their outdoor sort of living. You can see there's not a lot of outdoor living space, so it would eat that up if they did that.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm now understanding that those stairs down from the connector balcony above are within the footprint of the building.
Right.
Not outside.
Right.
Okay.
And then it also gives them a second way out of the second floor of their house, which is nice from a safety standpoint.
Okay. Thanks.
While Manuel's here, is any other questions maybe for the applicant?
I do. And I hate to be on the other side of Mr. Gee over there, but I'm struggling a little bit, Manuel, with the design of the outbuilding. Help me out here. It says the building should reflect the character of the period of the house to which the outbuilding will be related, and be compatible with other historic outbuildings in the area. And on top of that, I do have an issue with the 5-foot setback versus 10. If I'm in a car that's 20 feet long and I'm backing out, I suspect it would take me almost 10 feet when I'm out to even see. And I would be right in the smack of that sidewalk. And so I'm a little concerned about that, those two items.
The first item is basically, if you squint your eyes and you look at the main house and you look at that house, it's, as you said, it's form and massing that we're responding to. The buildings across the street are single-story hip roof garages, I think, with the door facing the front. They're right on the sidewalks.
I get that, but we're nowhere near one story with this garage.
Right. I think there's a house the commission approved at the corner of Portland and, is it 19th, 18th?
You're asking me to remember something?
Anyway, it's almost exactly the same partie as far as a much bigger second two-story addition. The two-story rear addition of the house is bigger than the original house, but then the garage is a two-story garage right up at the sidewalk. There's no setback at all from the sidewalk. There's no setback from the alley. So the commission's recently, and that's a fairly recent project, I think, that was approved. So part of the whole process, before we got involved, before she bought the house, closed on the house, my client met with, I don't know if she met with you or Rob, I think she met with Robin and talked about, will they be able to make that a two-story structure? Will they be able to keep it where it is? Yes. Move forward. If they had said no, at that point we want a 10-foot setback. We would have designed the whole kitchen and garage on the other side of the house, which the neighbors might have appreciated much less because it would be on their property line. But But we moved forward, on that, and then after the last meeting, in working with staff, they said, yes, we said this when you first met, but it's really bigger than what we, had envisioned. Can you set it back? We typically have asked for a 2-foot setback from the alley, and then we're fine with the 5-foot setback from the street. So we've been working with the staff all along on this and designing according to their, guidance, and so I'm a little surprised about the questions about setback from the alley and the street, just in terms of it's compatible with other things you've done. And I'm a neighbor. I live. This is Sweetbriar. I live on Linden, so it's 2 blocks away. I walk my dogs, which are now my kids. I guess they're at daycare today. But when they were little, I walked my kids here, and certainly I'm concerned about safety of vehicular traffic. Me and Oscar Guillamond, we stand out on Linden, we yell at cars. I'm constantly yelling at cars. I walked out in front of a car yesterday that was just flying up my street, and I looked, and it was Eric Scoud, my friend's wife, driving this big SUV. But so anyway, we're really cognizant of the safety of the neighborhood. And so what I did is, after the last meeting, I went over that next day, and I drove sort of a couple block length of that alley, and on so is Wildwood the next street? Cedar? I can't remember the next street from south of Sweetbriar. There's another outbuilt, their garage right at the corner of the alley, right on the sidewalk in the alley. And I had the same sort of reaction Hunter did. I was going, okay, what happens if we pull this thing further back from the street? I'm going to go faster if that garage is back the full 10 feet because I've got more visibility. I'm going to psychologically feel safer, and had that reaction that right now with that garage right up there, I'm having to kind of crawl along and peek out. And so I think there's a real validity to what Hunter is saying. I don't know if that really answers your question, but I feel like we've sort of worked to compromise, compared to a situation where there's a garage right on the alley and right on the street. We pulled back a little bit. We've brought the scale of the outbidding down to be more compatible and very similar to other things you've already approved.
Any other follow-up questions to Manuel? Richard, you're good? Okay.
I didn't say I was good, but I don't have
We
any other
can
questions.
argue about style. It's sort of.
Do you have a question for him?
I do.
Okay. Thanks. You have a question for him?
No, I was just going to respond. Richard, I think something we...
Thanks, Manuel.
Sure. I think something we struggle with regularly is that the language that is in our guidelines relative to the sort of architectural compatibility. And so part of our guidelines sound like it should look historic. And yet...
It's not to design at all. I seem to recall other cases that we've scaled down a outbuilding, and maybe it was because it was near a smaller home. And this is a pretty substantial existing home. But I remember scaling these things down because they appeared to be too big. And that's...
Scale.
Yeah.
Is your concern?
Yeah. No, it's not the design. It's just...
Okay.
Go ahead, Ben.
I'd like to respond to some of the concerns and I guess consider some of the alternatives, because there's been quite a bit of discussion about setbacks and precedent, or is it safer this way or safer that way. I think if you look at the garage and in appreciation of neighborhood having representation here and speaking, is if we were to meet the setbacks and turn the garage, I dare say that the garage would nearly be connected to the house, and you would have, because of the prevailing setback, something that fills the rest of the block. And we might not be talking about setback from the alley, but we'd be having a different discussion here, and still an objection. So from our standpoint, for good or bad, there has to be, I think, a balance here, and certainly something that the architect and the applicant has considered in the project total. And I do think that I'm of the opinion that closer does tend to slow things down, and even with if the applicant did not have a new garage plan and the existing garage were in the same position, I question the safety of many more vehicles coming down the alley and having intersection with pedestrians because it was even closer than this garage is to the sidewalk situation. So not that either is absolutely right or the safest situation, but I certainly don't think we're drastically altering the safety of cars moving in and out of there. If anything, I would argue that we're improving it slightly by cars that are moving down the alley and giving more visibility to pedestrians that are coming up the street, up Streetbar. But I will have to, my read on the second-story connector is that it's just that. It's a second-story connector. However artfully done or minimized from a previous application, it's a second-story connector, not necessarily a breezeway between the house and the garage. And that, to me, lacks precedent within our districts. And as however convenient for the applicant, I think, is not something I see appropriate within our historic districts, and certainly something I don't want to have to defend or make the call on one way or the other for future applicants, and this applicant included.
Okay. Any more discussion from anyone? Okay, can I get a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the application. Excuse me, let me get to the staff recommendations. That we approve the application with the conditions that the staff have outlined, with the exception of number 1, that the second-story skyway connector be eliminated. So I'm recommending that we approve the application with the staff conditions of number 2 and number 3 only.
Okay. Do I have a second? Second. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Motion does not carry.
Would you, I had a hard time telling who said aye and who's.
Okay.
Could we do show of hands just so I make sure I get the record correct?
Yeah, Hunter and, well, go ahead. Hunter and
favor.
Sam were the only two in favor.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, can we get a second motion, maybe?
I'll move approval with staff recommendation.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, all opposed?
Aye.
Okay. All right, motion carries with staff recommendations.
Chairperson, it's 4 o'clock. Would anyone be interested in taking a break at this point before moving on, or would you like to keep trudging through?
How you guys?
Trudge. I'm ready to trudge on.
Oh, yeah.
Soldier on.
I would recommend we keep moving, but it's up to you guys. Do anybody need a quick break?
That's what I was looking at. I took one before we got here.
Okay, so Ben has to go.
No, I was late getting here because I went in anticipation of this.
Okay, 1906 Holly Street.
1906 Holly Street is a one-story house with a gabled L form constructed circa 1920, or it could be earlier. I think the applicant has uncovered an earlier date. In June of this year, the commission denied an application to construct a two-story addition to this house. The applicant is now proposing to construct a one-story addition to this one-story house. Staff is recommending approval of the project with conditions, most notably with the condition that the addition step in 1 foot from each of the side walls of the house. Next slide. Here are some historic photographs placed next to contemporary photographs. The top 2 photos show that on the left side of the house, behind the gable, is a one-story addition that is not original to the house. It does not appear in its current form in the 1986 photo on the left. In addition, the foundation material for this portion of the house does not match the rest of the house's foundation material. The two bottom photos show that on the right side, behind the side bay, is the back part of the gabled L. It is believed that this portion of the house was reconstructed after a fire in 2003. It is not known how much of this portion of the house is original and how much was reconstructed. The foundation materials match the foundation of the rest of the house, but the roof framing is new. Next slide. Here is the site plan. The addition will nearly double the depth of the house, adding 38 feet to the back. The addition does not step in from the side walls of the house, and it matches the width of the house. Staff recommends that a condition of approval be that the addition step in a minimum of 1 foot from each of the side walls of the house. When the commission and staff have approved insets of less than 1 foot in the past, it has generally been because there's a change in materials or other specific features of the addition that differentiate the historic structure from the new addition. In addition, additions with minimal insets have been more modest in scale than the one proposed. For an addition that is nearly doubling the size of the historic structure, an inset should be required to differentiate the old and the new. After the initial inset, the addition can step back out to match the line of the house. Next slide. Here is the roof form. The historic house has a gabled L form with an approximate 10.5 to 12 slope. On the west elevation, the addition will continue the roof form of the house and will match the existing slope. On the east side, a shed roof with a slope of approximately 3.5 to 12 will be added. The shed will tie into the point of the cross gable. The new shed roof will require the removal of some of the original roof form. Staff finds that if the addition steps in 1 foot from each of the house's sidewalls, thereby differentiating the existing house from the addition, the alteration to the house's historic roof form is acceptable. Next slide. Here is the left elevation. On the left side, the applicant is proposing to increase the height of the existing addition by 2 feet so that the eave of the addition is 2 feet taller than the eave of the house. And you can kind of see the dotted line of which shows the form of the existing addition on the house. Next slide. On the right elevation, the addition's eave height and ridge height will match that of the historic structure. However, you can see on the side facades that an inset of at least 1 foot would help break up the mass of the structure and will differentiate the historic house from the addition. Next slide. Here is the rear facade. The materials for the addition are hardy plank siding, concrete block foundation, asphalt shingle roof, wood or cement fiberboard trim, and composite windows. Staff asked that the foundation be split-face block and asked to approve a sample of the windows as composite windows are not typically allowed. And next slide. And here are just some additional photographs of the house. That's the house in the middle, seen from the street. And one more slide. Additional photos of the house from the east side. So in conclusion, staff recommends approval of the project with the following conditions. The addition be inset a minimum of 1 foot from each of the side walls of the house. Staff review and approve the window and door specifications and the asphalt shingle color and the concrete block. And we specifically asked that the concrete block be split-faced. And 3, the major measurements, including the eave height, ridge height, width, depth, etc., be included on the drawings prior to issuing the permit. I'm happy to answer any questions, and the applicants are here to address the commission as well.
Thanks. Any questions for Melissa? Thanks. Okay, the applicant come forward. State your name, address.
Hi, we're back. I'm Daniel Long. This is Ronnie Swafford from 1906 Holly Street. Thank you for hearing us again. We have, after very careful consideration, taken everything you said last time to heart and worked very closely with the staff to try to figure out a home that we'd be happy with. We have conceded a whole second floor, and we've also given up 900 square feet. We were also, which was very difficult for us, building back into the yard that we did not want to lose. And it's just a decision, as we discussed last time, that is very personal and that we made. We're very happy now with the house. The issue that we have, I think we're in agreement with everything the staff has proposed, except for the insets. Excuse me. As we've gotten to know our neighbors, we've learned of other exceptions to the insets in the neighborhood. So that having that knowledge makes the insets difficult for us. The house is very narrow. So to come in 1 foot would eat into the width of the house on the interior. And what we find as well is on the east side of the house, it's an addition. So if we were, in understanding the nature, or I guess the spirit of the guidelines, is that you hope to differentiate from the historic home to the addition. In this instance, we would be differentiating a previous addition from our new addition. We've also discovered that on the west side of the house, there is question for me, as to what is historic and what is new. We found an older footprint of the house, which shows a very different footprint than what exists now. And so that being said, we very humbly and respectfully request the exception to the inset that has been allowed in other instances. 2 other points there. One is that if it's for the outside wall, the house actually has a natural inset because of the bay, as well as the fact that if it is to differentiate the old from the new, and we must differentiate the older potential additions from the newer additions, we would love the opportunity to do it in a different way, as suggested in the report. Prior to the report, we had thought the inset was the only way to differentiate. We were told that that was the only way to differentiate. But the report says in other exceptions, other means of differentiation have been allowed. So we would love the opportunity to do that, and we would be open to suggestions from all of you as to how we can differentiate in a different way to preserve the width of the house. And I think that's all we have.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
I do have a quick question for you, just in clarity of reading the application, the drawings and the application submitted. Is the dashed line indicate the existing house? I'm looking particularly at the east side elevation.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And I'm not sure if it was addressed, but the reason we're stepping up is to address the grade.
Grade change.
Yeah.
Sure.
I have a question. Do you have a plan that shows what it would, have you seen what it would look like to do the inset as Melissa recommended in her?
We've not done drawings with an inset included. We are trying to do more of an open floor plan in the addition, so there's no real place to hide the inset. It's going to be very obvious from the inside that what it is.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Okay. Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, open public hearing. Anyone like to speak regarding this project? All right, close public hearing. Discussion?
I have a question for staff in terms of interpretation of bay or not to bay or not to bay. The form of the house that isn't suspected to be a rebuild from a fire, while it kind of angles out like a bay, with the gable roof being equivalent in form, even though it's angled, if that form were completed, would it, I'm curious if you would see that as maybe the existing kind of most outward width of the existing house, if I phrase that properly.
Yeah, certainly we would be open to, if they did an inset and were to come back out, they could have the opportunity to go out further than the back wall of the house. They could go as far out as to match the length of the bay. And I think when we looked at this, there could also be the opportunity on the other side, on this left facade, because of the house is shifted to one side of the lot, and because of the peculiarities of the lot, they could, if they stepped in a foot, go a little bit wider than the back wall of the house on that point too. So, they didn't propose that, so, but if they did, we would be open to it. I think what we're, for us, having that inset, though, is important.
Sure, and I guess my question specifically was to that form, I think, could be read either way, but it almost seems like cross gable more than anything, and that would it be appropriate if the house, instead of bumping in to differentiate, might even come out flush with the house. Is that?
Oh, so to go out rather than go in. I'm not sure if the commission's ever approved that before. Typically, we like to see the back corner of the house preserved.
Right.
I don't believe that the commission, I don't know if Robin might know more than I do, but I don't know if the commission's ever approved going out wider versus stepping in immediately at the back wall of the house.
And I'm responding to some of the comments of the applicant that, the narrower you go, the deeper, just for the sake of this being truly a one-story house and the depth of the lot and all those things considered, that to go back yet again for a redesign, I'm not interested in sending them in that direction, but also in meeting the guidelines, but also perhaps meeting their needs and preserving more of what they hold dear in this particular neighborhood in this lot. Thanks.
To that point, and to Melissa's previous latter point, that's why I wondered about the plan, if it had been worked out at all.
Not necessarily for us. I just was wondering from the staff's interpretation, what the bounds were from the existing house to the new addition.
There could be some flexibility in some of how the site worked with it if it was worked out in plan. Any other discussion?
Melissa, I just had a question. I know that you made it clear that before this was submitted that you wanted to step in, but kind of where you and Ben were going with coming back out to the edge of that bay, and given that the house is set off to the side on the lot, that maybe if you stepped in, you could even come out wider on that other side. Was there any discussion about that potential scenario?
Yes, we did mention that to the applicants in a meeting that we had. I'm not sure exactly when the meeting was, but the meeting was not long after the last meeting, with the last public hearing.
Can we speak to that? Sure, please.
Actually, I'll jump in if you don't mind. I think we discussed it even before the public hearing with Mr. Walker.
Okay. We did meet with Mr. Walker, and he did make that suggestion to us. Something that may be common knowledge to all of you, but is very new information to us, is that building out is much more expensive than building up. So in looking at our budget, and we are now getting the same amount or less house for the same amount of money, we couldn't really afford to expand out to that side.
And to rip out the whole side of the house.
Rip out the whole side of the house.
Extend and rebuild on the sides just seemed much more expensive.
Much more than we could really do. So we did think about it very long and hard, and we didn't just jump in and come back to the next committee meeting. We really kind of chewed on it and tried to decide what was best and what we could actually do. So we did consider it.
Getting wider was more expensive than going to a second floor?
Well, going back, building more foundation and more roof turns out it makes sense, but it's more expensive than building a second floor and keeping the addition shorter. So the same principle applies if we're going to build out 5 feet that they said we could on the east side. Tearing out the whole side of the house and rebuilding it and back.
I think we're talking about turning the corner later than that, not tearing out one side of it, but differentiating at the back corner, stepping in and then turning the corner so there's some texture. Because my concern is this is just a big, long mass, and it'd be nice if there was some texture.
We're kind of getting a little bit too much into design, but really, I almost feel like you might get somebody just to draw it. I think there might be something that could be worked out that you'd almost potentially could get what you needed and could still be something that we could be favorable to.
I think, just for clarity, in terms of, I don't know that it's less. It's just a different shape.
Yeah.
That was the point I guess I was trying to get at with staff, but again, not our.
We can't get into
We have the application you've submitted, and we'll carefully, as carefully considered as you did in presenting.
And again, anything aside from the step in, if there's other ways with materials, with
This is a new idea to us because we were told that wasn't allowed. So if using a different material, using a different color, using a strip, using any other means of differentiating the old from the new, we would love to do that as well.
Okay. I think I just want to suggest, because we looked at it last time, and in my mind, it wasn't even close, and they told you that, and then you asked us for guidance, so we tried to do a little bit of that, and then coming back again, they've told you there's this 1 foot inset option that I think would have put you on the consent agenda. I would just encourage you to listen to Melissa and Sean and Robin, because I think they have a lot of tools in their toolbox that you can work with that
We have
would make it
listened, and
easier
the
for us
information
to
given
approve.
was, it seems not complete and revealed only in the report. So, we're doing our best as we get new information.
I can maybe help with that a little bit. When the inset has not been required, it's for very small additions, and where there's a change from a masonry material to a lap siding, and the addition's very small. This doesn't meet that scenario, and that's why we gave the guidance of the 1 foot. That's what the commission has required on all other projects of this type.
Did we ever use like a simple reveal instead of a 1 foot setback? Did you use like a little
Not for an
channel?
addition of this size. I mean, typically, we would encourage the inset to go back 2 feet, because 1 foot and 1 foot is kind of hard, I would imagine pretty hard to construct. But for an addition of this size, the inset has always been required.
And I want to be sure that the applicant understands that an inset of 1 foot, and I want to make sure that I understand, an inset of 1 foot doesn't mean skinny and then go back 100 feet. A hyphen concept is something that was considered, and that makes sense as applicants when I say hyphen, that you go in, go back a bit, and come back out, and that can happen in a relatively short distance. I just want to make sure that that was something
clear,
that was considered.
absolutely.
Okay, very good, very good.
Melissa made that very clear.
Yeah.
Okay, very good, thanks.
Okay, any more questions of the applicant while they're here? Okay, thanks again.
Thank you.
Okay, have a motion?
I hate to do it, but I think this could be a whole lot better than it is if they would work on it more. I think the long walls are not at all in a wall this long is just not in keeping at all, especially for an addition with anything that I've seen in that neighborhood. So, and I don't think we can sit here and redesign it. So I would move for disapproval based on that it's not inset and.
You're right.
Now, let me make sure I
What we're doing is approving with staff conditions.
Yeah, you're improving, the staff approved it, they just had the 3 conditions.
Sorry. I had something else in front of me. Sorry.
She almost had a baby.
No. Okay, I'm there. You did have a solution, sorry. I would make a motion to approve with the staff condition that it be inset 1 foot.
And the other 2.
And conditions 2 and 3.
Okay, thanks. A second?
Second.
I've got a question. We have a second. Does the staff feel differently about the east versus the west side? And the reason I ask is, while I don't like a long continuous wall necessarily, it does appear, if you look at the back of the house, that the east side of the house is clearly an addition that was likely, not part of the original structure. I don't know if the staff agrees with that or not, but where the roof is really low slope, and whether offsetting from an addition that probably doesn't really comply with the guidelines in the first place is necessarily as important as offsetting from where the original house is, the back corner of the original house.
You're right that I'll go back to the right facade. That existing portion behind the gable is new. I think it's after 1986, so it's relatively new. There was a piece there before, but it had a different roof line. And I believe the foundation is different, so we know that it is an addition. We would suggest that stepping in is still important, just because otherwise you're ending up with this long wall, but you could accomplish it, or they could accomplish it in 2 different ways. They could take down the existing addition, step it in just behind that gable, then step back out, or if they wanted to keep that existing addition, that would be fine too, and then they could step back in at the back wall of the house. So I think on this side there's flexibility with where that inset would occur, whether or not it occurs at the historic portion of the house or behind the existing addition, depending upon what met their needs most. But we felt that stepping in on that side was still important, because otherwise you're ending up with a long wall of mass.
Okay, we had a
Breaking it up
motion.
a little.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, motion carries as staff recommended. Okay, 2708 Belmont Boulevard.
Okay, you see a photo here of 2708 Belmont Boulevard. The house was constructed circa 1915. It is listed as contributing to the historic character of the Belmont-Hillsborough National Register District. Next. It is the middle house in a row of three very similar houses. They are all 2.5-story brick craftsman-style houses with side gabled roofs and gabled front dormers. This house, the original portion of 2708 was originally 34 feet tall, 33 feet wide, and about the same 33 feet deep front to back, but then with a 9-foot deep front porch. It has a full width porch. The two on either side have gabled front porches. This house has a non-original but non-contributing necessarily 2-story rear addition and a rear shed dormer that predate the overlay. Next. The applicant is proposing to construct a 2-story garage with an apartment above, connected to the primary building by a screened porch. Staff finds that this does not meet the standards for the detached accessory dwelling units, as outlaid in Metro Ordinance. That requires that DADU, detached accessory dwelling unit, be separated from the primary building by at least 10 feet. Because of that, we looked at this as an addition in the recommendations you have. Going to kind of diverge from that, but I'll promise to come back to it. Talking about the scale and massing, the height of the garage would be approximately 10 feet shorter than the house, with eaves at 17 feet above grade. The width of the garage is also 8 feet narrower than the width of the house as well. The screened porch section, essentially that hyphen in connection, would be set in from the sides of the house by 4 feet on the left and 8 feet on the right, with a crossed gabled roof 12 feet lower than the primary roof of the house, so that it's also lower than the roof of the garage. I guess you can go to the next one there. The scale and massing of the screened porch and of the garage unit in and of themselves would be compatible and subordinate to that of the house. The location with the current design is such that the rear of the structure would be 10 feet off the rear property line. The side setbacks would meet the current bulk zoning setbacks, but sort of like the other case we talked about, this, in looking at it as an addition, wouldn't meet the setbacks if it's reviewed as a primary structure. Part of our reason for looking at it as, or the primary reason for looking at it as an addition, was how I said that staff didn't find that it met the standards for detached accessory dwelling units. Recently, today and earlier this week, we've had some discussions with codes trying to nail down some discrepancies on the way that they look at or the way they define attached structures and attached garages. Currently, they would say that structures connected by, can you go back one previous? A space that is not heated and cooled would not qualify as attached. The reason for that being that it would allow a horizontal property regime to be attached by a breezeway or a porch. So to codes, a two-family structure is required to have at least an 8x8 section of shared wall space. And as you've seen, the result of this outside of historic overlays is those two townhouse or duplexes, essentially duplex units attached by the umbilical connection. We don't think that that's the intent of how the guideline is, or how it's meant to apply in the historic districts, and nor is it really in keeping with the detached accessory dwelling standards. So sort of following code's logic, they would allow a garage to be connected by a screened space like this, but not a structure that could be used as a dwelling. So sort of making sure that our recommendation comports with code's definition there. Following the discussions we've had, we're revising our recommendation from what's written before you. And staff is recommending approval of the application to construct a detached accessory dwelling unit with a condition that the garage be separated from the primary building by at least 10 feet. Staff finds that this would meet the design guidelines for additions as a screen porch and as a detached accessory dwelling unit. I guess I skipped over the materials there, but the materials are compatible with those of the house there. Cement fiber siding, composite shingles.
Since it's different, Sean, make sure you say that one more time. Yeah, make sure you understand that one more time.
So
why you're approving it,
yes,
and as opposed to
following our discussions with codes on what is and what is not attached, staff recommends approval of the application to construct a detached accessory dwelling unit with the condition that that structure be separated from the primary building by at least 10 feet. Staff finds that this would meet the design guidelines for additions and for new construction of outbuildings and the standards for detached accessory dwelling units. Another solution would be that would meet the design guidelines and would meet the code's definition and requirement for what is a detached structure, would be to reduce the massing, maybe now to the site plan perfect, reduce the massing of the screened connection between the primary building and the detached accessory dwelling unit to be less than 8 feet wide. That's something that codes allows for breezeways. That, as I said, also would meet the design guidelines for detached accessory dwelling units.
Approvals with two alternate
potential,
two alternate approaches, I guess. Okay.
Essentially, either one would
alternate
be to
conditions,
minimize or eliminate the connection between.
Minimize or eliminate connection.
To clarify, and maybe, I don't know if this is where you're headed or not, but you wouldn't necessarily have to choose which condition.
Right.
Just that one of those conditions be met.
Okay.
If that helps.
Thanks. That's good.
Yeah.
Has this been gone over with the applicant? Or is he just hearing it?
We kind of, no, not really. Not to hate to surprise him like that. Mr. Tim Walker talked to him today and sort of just caught my ear just as I was running out the door, and he said, "See what you can do." So,
okay.
Mr. Chair, after we've gotten started with this one, I realized which case we were on. In the interest of full disclosure, I had some ex parte communication with, not with any of the applicants, but with an interested party. I'm not sure the relationship with the applicant. I had not seen the case prior to that, and just generally talked about how the interpretation of detached accessory dwelling units works and what my understanding was, what the relationship of this case to the next, not being familiar with who is absolutely adjacent next door. I muddled my way through how we've interpreted those things in general in cases in the past. I don't feel like that communication will affect the evidence or the case presented here.
Okay. Thank you.
That's probably a good opportunity to remind you that we received a comment from a neighbor, and it was distributed by email. So just a reminder of that.
Okay. Any questions for Sean?
Just as a reminder, that letter was in support of the application. Was that correct?
It was in support, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sean, would you please go over the second proposal, the second part of this, at the either or?
Okay.
I'm not quite sure I got it down. I was writing the other one.
So for their definition of attached for in duplexes, codes requires a shared wall space of 8 feet by 8 feet. So sort of the converse of that is if it is less than 8 feet, then they don't look at it as being the connection that a duplex would require. So if that if this could be reduced to meet that, then that would also meet the detached accessory dwelling unit standards.
So in other words, that's probably an unlikely scenario because it's a pretty significant screened-in area, and we're basically saying bringing it down to an 8-foot wide screened-in area that connects between the two buildings, or less than 8 feet. Is that right?
Yes.
Or eight or less, maybe. But that would be an option for them, I guess, is what the staff is saying, that we could approve either or one of those options. So we can hear from the applicant as to whether that's
something they're interested in.
I'm sorry, I might still not be totally understanding it. If we reduce it to 8, that is 8 or less, that is making it, quote, detached, right?
Yes.
And then the alternative is that if it doesn't have heat and air, it's also detached? No?
If you don't connect the roofs and you separate the detached garage, the screen-in porch gets 10 feet closer to the street, further from the alley, and is separated.
10-foot separation.
Okay.
Between the porch and the garage, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So as is, it's considered an addition. The whole thing is considered an addition.
That's how we reviewed it initially, with a recommendation for disapproval. But like I said, we sort of had a discussion with codes as to what they would consider this, and we want to make sure that we don't have a different definition.
Okay. So if neither one of the recommendations in your condition are acceptable by the applicant, we would have the choice to vote on the application as it is currently. And did you go through the reasons why it doesn't meet the guidelines as an addition?
I think I skipped over that part, but I can certainly point it out just in case that is how the discussion goes.
Well, maybe I need clarification now, because I was about to say we talk about what he just presented, not about this. So maybe I need some help here. Which way do you want to do it? Should we do it?
Correct me if I'm wrong here, but the problem we're running into is, what is it? Is it an addition or is it a detached accessory dwelling unit? And because it's all physically attached, we initially looked at it as an addition. If it is an addition, it doesn't meet the rear setback requirements. But because codes will then look at it and say, no, this is not attached, then they're going to be looking at it in a different way, and we need to be on the same page. So that's how we came up with these new recommendations on 2 different scenarios that would allow that garage to be a detached accessory dwelling unit. So if it is still reviewed as an addition, there may be an issue with the use that they want for that rear portion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what I'm getting is we really can't review it as it was presented, as it was disapproved. We have to review it as, because of codes, it won't be allowed anyway by codes by what was done.
It's possible, right?
Yeah, so we have to review it as.
But the current application, the current application would then be reviewed as a detached dwelling unit.
Right.
Correct.
And then the way to accomplish that is with one of those 2 conditions.
Okay. So but the application as designed we can review, and what I understand is that because it has to be considered a detached dwelling unit by code, then while your staff report is sort of void because it was reviewed as an addition, I want to be sure I understand what the recommendation is. Not, and I assume it would be disapproval, because you've got conditions to approve if we separate it by 10 feet or we narrow it down to 8 feet or less. Yeah. So what are the issues with it? You mentioned setback, I think. What are the issues as designed and as a detached dwelling unit that the staff has a concern with.
It can't be a detached accessory dwelling unit in this current configuration because it is attached. So it cannot be a detached accessory dwelling unit. It doesn't meet the standards. So that's why
And the
we
guidelines.
initially, the standards for detached accessory dwelling units, which is separate from design guidelines.
So, yeah, so going down that process seems like it would just be a dead end because we could go through all that, but it couldn't be reviewed that way anyway. At least that's what I understand.
I'm not sure I'm
You could review
comfortable
this.
reviewing something that we haven't seen drawings
It's possible
for.
to approve what's been presented.
We thought the thought the conditions were something that wouldn't radically change the design, since it's just really either separating that last piece out and pulling it out, or changing the configuration of the porch, the screened-in porch. That was our thinking, but certainly you may disagree with that and you may want to see new plans, and that's fine. Again, you could review it as an addition as it is proposed, but it likely will not meet the needs of the applicant who wants it to be a detached accessory dwelling unit. Cannot be a detached accessory dwelling unit with this current configuration. And because those are standards in the ordinance, you don't have the leeway with those that you do design guidelines.
All right, if you guys are okay, maybe we could get the applicant to get in up to, and then just Sean, be prepared.
Sure.
We might still. Okay. And
Afternoon. My name is Dwayne Barrett. Along with my wife, Mimi Bliss, own 2708 Belmont Boulevard. I've got my architect, Van Pond, here because I wasn't sure if I was going to start get peppered with a bunch of things that I clearly don't understand. I'm just a tax lawyer. I'm just used to looking at code and regulations, administrative rulings, and how you interpret them. And I didn't roll out of bed one day and just go, I think I want to do this. I looked over at the side of my next door neighbor at 2706 Belmont Boulevard. I don't know if you can pass those out. At the plans that were approved by this commission last December, and I saw what they were doing. Part of what they did at 2706 Belmont Boulevard, based upon the recommendations of this commission, was do something that I understand is called a setback reduction. And those setback reductions were on the side. Those setback reductions went into and up to an access easement. What's being handed to you right now are a number of things. The first is a picture of what the access easement looks like. There was a driveway that stops midway through. When I found out that the rental property had changed hands last October, I went to the new owners and asked them if they'd be interested in my moving my privacy fence and continuing on through. They told me, we'll get back to you. The next thing I saw was plans or proposal to this commission that basically had the easement area as green space, and they were building right up to it. The space between the corner of the lot of the new construction, it's right here, to the downspout is a little under 8.5 feet. I can't practically use that to continue all the way through. So the driveway that is in the front really won't be something that can be used, which I have used historically. It's going to have to be something that is worked out with the new owners, which I understand are relatives, or to be the relatives of the contractor and developer of 2706. But looking at the approval of 2706, then the staff recommendations, and I've given you that staff approval, and on page 7, it starts with the discussion, analysis, and findings, and it begins with things such as typically you want to have an inset, but we're not going to have an inset here. here are the reasons why we believe that it's okay to allow building into the setback areas. And one of the primary reasons is the lot is at an angle and there's already an encroachment. Those same factors apply in my situation. In my situation, my corner of my house, where the gate is, that corner of the house encroaches upon the 5-foot setback. In the materials I've handed you, I've even tagged with a lime green tab. You will notice that all of the lots are at angles, or the houses are at angles on the lots. You will also notice that when you approved 2706 Belmont, you approved setback reduction, not only on the side, but in the back alley. You approved a 10-foot setback reduction when you approved of the attached garage. That's how you viewed it, at least 8 months ago. It was a screened porch, as you can see there, that then attaches immediately to an attached garage. At that time, you said when the location of the attached garage is in the general location of an historic accessory building, comma, the new garage is located in the basement level, comma, and the vehicular access is on the rear elevation. Staff finds that the proposed attachment meets all of these criteria. Well, that's what we proposed, is to have a garage that comes in from the basement level in the alley, 2 cars. 2708 is a duplex. I have a tenant. I provided you pictures of the back of my house at 2708 that shows the access that I believe it's the 3rd picture with the stairs. I plan to take that out. My wife, Mimi, works out of the house. Moving the apartment to over the garage would actually make things a little bit easier in terms of noise in the house on occasion. The proposal would, I thought, be consistent with what is going on that block. In other words, when you look at the vicinity map, you see 2710. Jim Massey has written a letter in support of my proposal. His garage, it's 2 or 3 feet from the alley. On the vicinity map, you'll see there's nothing at 2708. 2706, it's been approved to have a garage that goes all the way to 10 feet from the alley. Imposing a 20-foot setback then would mean that my house isn't consistent with the houses on the immediate vicinity. And if you look at the second vicinity map I attached, you will also see that 2700 has a building that's right on the alley. So in order to be consistent with the immediate vicinity and the accessory buildings, it seems to me that my proposal should be viewed as an attached building, is that the phrase? An addition, and with a setback reduction. And I know that you can grant setback reductions because I've heard you do it several times earlier, and I read 2706 several times when it seemed like you wanted to help them get whatever it is that they wanted to build. But mine isn't anything like 2706. Mine is narrower and shorter. My proposal is narrower than the 2706 proposal. My proposal is narrower than my house at 2708. It is shorter than the proposal at what is being built at 2706, and it is shorter than what is at 2708. And I know this is confusing. I know Mr. Mosley got a phone call from the gentleman, David Kleinfelter, who is one of my partners, because I went to David about it, and David didn't have an immediate answer either. And so the thought process was, let's just do what any other governing body would do or administrative body, and let's just be consistent. Whatever may have been discussed before about a detached dwelling unit or whatever that's called, let's just go with what we've done in the past. And what we did in the past was we had an addition, and the addition had an attachment by a screened-in porch. It's not going to be heated, it's not going to be cooled, and it's going to attach to a garage. I would relocate the apartment on my second floor to over the two-car garage, and then I'm going to take that space in the second floor. Obviously, I'll have to wall it off on the exterior when I remove the stairwell. And then I'm going to put a door in the house, and I'm going to let 9 and 10-year-olds run around in there and beat it up, because that wasn't the original proposal. My original proposal was just to make sure I had a place to park, since I'm losing the parking spot in the front of my house. So I would like to say, before we finish, that I did notice in the materials that the Commission, according to Ordinance BL 2007-45, has the ability to reduce building setbacks and extend height limitations of the required underlying base zoning for new construction, additions, and accessory structures. Appropriate setback reductions will be determined based on, and here's the criteria, and I would just like to go through the criteria. The existing setback of the contributing primary buildings and accessory structures found in the immediate vicinity. Mine is the same as 2706 and 2710. I'm at 2708. I think I satisfy the first criteria. Setbacks of like structures historically found on the site, it's not applicable. To my knowledge, there has never been anything on the site other than, I'm sorry?
Oh, you always give a few more seconds. Just go ahead and wrap up.
Okay.
But it was 10 minutes, so that's kind of how it says. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I was
okay.
not aware of
That's
that.
okay. She gives the thing, and we just need to wrap up a little bit after that. Okay.
It's my first time here.
Yeah, that's okay.
The shape of the lot, the house sits on a lot at an angle, just like 2706 does. Alley access or lack thereof, yes, I do have alley access. The proximity of the adjoining structures, again, the same as 2706. And then the property lines. The easement has now been burdened. I'm going to lose the front parking spot. And a 5-foot setback has been encroached upon by my house. I mean, those are existing. And again, if there are going to be questions, I mean, is there a chance I can have my architect help field it? Because again, when you start talking about additions and setbacks, and apparently there's a lot of confusion about that.
There is a lot of confusion. We'll probably have Van up here before it's all said and done. And we'll probably call you back more potentially, but I appreciate it. Thanks a lot. But I'm going to go ahead real quick before we get into discussion. I'm going to open the public, and then I think we need to talk through this a little bit more. But first of all, is there open public hearing? Does anyone like to speak regarding this project?
I'd like to do this run. What time is the meeting over? Question for those who are still on the agenda.
No time.
Well, yeah, we'll finish the agenda. Yeah, we'll finish the agenda. Yeah, okay. Okay. All right, I'm going to close public hearing. I think what's, and if you guys are clear, that's good. But I feel like the whole change has got especially with his argument. So I think we just need to make sure we're all really, including the applicant, understands what we're really reviewing now, because it's kind of a little, at least from my standpoint. I mean, you guys may be all clear as.
Do we have it? So there was no public comment? Sorry.
No, there were no. Okay. Yeah, there was, to make sure we're going to listen to their.
Sure.
So maybe just before we get into our discussion, do you mind, Robin? Do you mind just making sure we're just all clear, and for the applicant too, and then Van I want us all to make sure we can speak with this.
I apologize for this being so confusing. Detached accessory dwelling units are still somewhat of a new piece of the ordinance for us, and we haven't had anyone come to us with one that is attached. And it certainly was not the intent of the detached accessory dwelling unit to be attached. What we didn't consider was that codes has a very different definition of attachment than what we have. So that's where we ran into problems with, what do you look at this as? An addition or detached accessory dwelling unit? And as you can see from your staff recommendation, since it was all physically attached, we looked at it as an addition. And that all it really needed was a setback reduction. And of course, there certainly is a valid argument for all the projects that were around them. We still felt like, based on all of the pushback we've had recently about the scale and massing of additions and garages, that maybe we needed to really hold that line pretty closely as far as the setback. But however, that is no longer relevant. And those additions are, those other additions in the neighborhood are not relevant because they're not detached accessory dwelling units. This is a detached accessory dwelling unit, and so it needs to be detached. And according to codes, there's a couple of different ways that they can do that. They can physically detach it and move it 10 feet away, or they can change that porch to where it's really just a narrow connector, and they won't consider that as an attachment.
Okay.
So those are the two options.
Okay, if you guys don't mind, I'll break it up a little bit and just ask the architect to kind of get involved in. You have something quick, Richard?
What's changed since the one that was approved several months ago, and that what you just told us?
That's a different case, and it does not have a detached accessory dwelling unit. It is just an addition.
Why not? What's the difference
They didn't
between
ask.
this one and the one that's being proposed?
It's just an addition. It's a single family from the front of the house to the back of the
It was
house.
just a garage. There was
Yeah.
not a residential unit above the garage. Is that correct?
This one is a second residential unit, so therefore it has to follow those
That's a
standards.
garage.
Okay, so this one that I'm looking at 2706 is a garage and not a dwelling unit within the
Correct.
garage, and that's the difference.
Correct.
Because otherwise it looks just like just.
Yes, they look very similar.
But maybe to simplify, what we're all confused about is attached or detached. And if that screen porch was a pergola, then that garage is detached.
Correct.
Okay.
And the one reason I wanted to make sure, if you guys don't mind, we bring Van up here. I want to make sure the applicant understands what the changes happened too. And you know what I mean? Because we're debating something, and they may not even have a
Ask a question that's...
Hey, Robin, am I missing something here on the new addition that on 2706? They're showing a bonus room. Am I not reading something properly?
A bonus room is not the same as a dwelling unit. A dwelling unit has a full kitchen and a full bath.
Okay. So
What I think from the interpretation of the codes department, and this is now all becoming much clearer to me now, having seen one application to the next, is the stated application, well, the way codes looks at detached or non-detached has to do with, I think, a kitchen sink and a shower.
Okay.
If you have a toilet and a sink, that's technically not a use that requires a tenant per se. It's an addition, not a detached dwelling unit. There's not a second dwelling unit considered on the site, and so that's a distinction. I'll leave it at that.
Really quick, Hunter, did you have one quick statement?
Yeah.
Thank you.
One more second, Van.
Yeah, sorry, Van. Is there a process of which an applicant can get a variance to the use distinction here? In other words,
This body doesn't issue variances.
I know, but
so,
is there a process outside of this body that they can?
not that I'm aware of for a dadu.
To the extent that it requires how the zoning code is defined or interpreted, and whether a detached or attached dwelling unit or how that is interpreted, that is subject to review. And it's an item A appeal to the Board of Zoning Appeals. So if one accepts what codes is saying, or if one doesn't accept what codes is saying as how they define it, they can appeal the interpretation of the zoning administrator in that regard, with regard to what that property can be used for. So they would have to allege essentially that the interpretation is incorrect or that it's an error or something like that. But they could do it that way.
Hardship or anything.
Okay.
No, not exactly. No. It would just be a matter of interpretation as to whether the way they're interpreting the code is consistent with what the code's meaning is.
I want to make sure
That's the only one that I'm aware of.
the architect and the representing the owner, let's make sure you understand kind of what's going on. And
I'm not sure. There it is. Yes. I'm not sure anyone does. Over the past 2 weeks, I've had from staff 2 different interpretations. And now, today, at 1:50, I got the one you just had. We came prepared based on the staff recommendation that's published on the website, that is public record, that the sign went up in the front yard for, and all these things, to discuss an addition to this dwelling with a reduced setback at the rear. Staff recommendation says that massing is subordinate. All these things are ticked off. We meet the setback requirements. To the discussion of Ms. Jones, how that space is used and approved to be used is up to zoning. Now, as a addition to the house. In discussions with Mr. Walker this morning on the phone, we discussed 2706 Belmont Boulevard. And I said, well, as I understand it, reading the staff recommendation, which was approved, we have an attached garage. I said, is that an attached garage? Is that an addition? He said, it's an addition. That's how we look at it. If we look at this as an addition, what we're asking for is a reduced rear setback consistent with the addition next door to us. So that's what we were prepared to talk about today. And in all fairness, we've waited our time just like everybody else here to talk about what we were given. And now we get something completely different. We'd rather have this reviewed as we submitted it, as we've been told by staff the entire time, and we're happy about that. We spent a lot of time doing that. In the past, when I've gone to zoning, even in projects in the Belmont-Hillsborough Conservation Overlay, for instance, 1914 19th Avenue South has a detached garage. And the discussion at that point, because it was before staff had some of the zoning powers it does now, recommendation powers, your board did. The question was on that, we had a connecting piece. Staff said, we can't approve that. We can say that meets our guidelines for design, but we do not know if that qualifies as an attached structure since the roof connects. You'll need to go to zoning to find that out. And that is what we did. That is the exact premise. And zoning said, we don't care how big, how wide, how narrow. It cannot be conditioned. It cannot have glass in it. It cannot be enclosed. This meets that litmus test. That's happened more than once. So that's what I can tell you about this and where we are and what we know about this case.
Well, and as the chair, I'm going to first say apologies because I don't think I've ever dealt with anything like this before either, where this thing, but there's going to take a lot more information because and Robin, I'll definitely defer to you because it was confusing to me and basically, and I knew it was confusing when the actual applicant came up and basically it was saying what Hunter was saying, well, let's look at the other one, but then the way it was presented is the other one cannot be reviewed that way. So
There's too many definitions that are unclear.
Yeah.
I mean, this body exists to preserve and conserve the texture of our neighborhoods. If 2706 is preserving and conserving the texture of the neighborhoods, so is this. We meet that exterior massing, bulk, what have you, is equitable. for two projects that are adjacent to one another. I mean, a lot of times you don't get that convenience, I admit, but having the identical house next door doing essentially the same footprint and same strategy actually did, I mean, that's what the applicant came to us and said, well, can we do this? And we said, well, let's try. And everything we got back until last 2 Wednesdays ago was, we'll review this as an addition with a setback.
Okay.
We don't know what's going to happen, yes.
So, and we might need Susan here, but I guess this body, we're kind of like, we just need to know which way we need to look at it. If we don't, and then by your recommendation, we can't look at it as an addition, but we just need to, we're all set either way probably to review it, but we just need to know which way we need to go. And if it's the way that it's been presented, then it's totally opposite with the applicant, and maybe they need to, they should have some awareness of that too. I don't know, Susan, do you have anything you want to add to any of this? Okay.
There are possibly two choices I'd like to throw out there. One, of course, is to ask the applicant to defer and wait till next month. I'm assuming they probably don't want to do that. Understandably, they're probably ready to get underway, and this is certainly not their fault. They did everything we've asked them to do. So if you agree that the overall massing of the addition, or whatever we want to call it, is close and correct enough, and a setback reduction could be appropriate based on the other similar applications that have been approved, you could approve it with the conditions that the applicant work with staff to work out the issues of, is it connected, is it not connected, does it need to be 8 feet, can it be 12 feet, so that they're not delayed too much longer. And I know that may make you a little uncomfortable to leave it that open, but staff is certainly comfortable with doing it that way if the applicant is.
Before we go there,
before we
on that path, I have a specific question about your application,
okay.
if I might.
Before we go there then, so let me make sure I understand what you're saying now. So really, then you're saying we need to look at it as originally presented, which was originally disapproval. We need to look at that review and make our judgment, which Hunter actually brought up in the very beginning, but like basically we throw out the last minute deal and go basically back to what was actually presented originally.
Well, I would say that you would look at it with the conditions that the staff and the applicant work together to figure out what the definition is of attached. Because the one thing we don't want to do is have you approve something, then they go to codes and they can't do it. And then they're just coming back next month anyway. And I really do think it's just a matter of changing that porch potentially, maybe not. They're minor changes in the grand scheme of things.
Robin, if you suppose the porch isn't even here, does the garage area itself qualify as a dadu just from a massing standpoint and dimensions and?
It did, correct?
Okay.
Yeah, it was
So that's a good assumption to start with.
Well, but we don't need to look at it that way though, because we're looking at it as all one thing now. But
if it doesn't qualify, then there's no point in even going down the other road of considering whether it's attached or not.
We've really got ourselves in them. But
I have a question for the applicant, or actually for the architect. And this question is in considering the application 2706 from 9 months ago, your application, and the specifics of it as an addition, considered as an addition. And we'll leave the rest of those questions aside for a moment. What is the floor-to-floor height from the garage FFE up to the finished floor of the second level in the outbuilding or in the back part of the addition?
I think it's on there, but it's 9 feet.
It's
8 foot tall garage, and then a 7-something bearing for the upper floor.
It's not excessive, I guess.
It's not huge. It's as tight as we can make it.
Right. I'm looking at the application that was handed around at 2706, and the finished floor of the house there relative to the garage FFE, and I think this case is a little, it's still cloudy, but coming back to me a little bit is, I think as an addition, that would be considered, and I think was considered by this commission as a basement garage as part of the addition. And in the total picture, I think that is permitted in the guidelines as I read through it, and so the relationship of finished floor of your house and the finished floor of the garage, and it being considered as a basement, that's the nature of the question I guess I'm moving towards, and wondering. I'm looking at the depiction of the site section here that I guess that's up on the screen, and trying to reconcile that between the two properties and specifically with the guidelines.
Sorry, I had that in front of me just a second.
No, it's understood.
Ben, are you saying you're trying to figure out whether we can, if we view it as an addition, whether we can...
I'm evaluating this application in light of the adjacent application. I mean, I feel like I'm not saying we ought to do one thing or the other. I'm just going, it seems to make sense to me, the case the applicant has presented is that 9 months ago, we have something that, while not completely identical, is not in form and in process different. Whether it's a detached accessory dwelling unit or not, certainly we would review, and the guidelines are different for an addition and an outbuilding. That determination is both up to what the applicant presents in an application to codes and how codes interprets that. Whether they want to put a shower and some of these other things in the detached building is the applicant's, we're not reviewing the floor plan, that's the applicant's choice. And so I think as submitted, well, we don't have the floor plan before us, but I think as submitted, I'm not sure what it is, and that will be up to the applicant to determine what it is. I'm trying to reconcile between how is this different from the last one, and is it different from the last one? Certainly, because we do one doesn't necessarily mean we do the other one, but if we don't, we surely need to have a pretty good reason of why we don't, because I have a feeling that the applicant, would find issue with that, or certainly would wonder why himself, being an attorney.
Well, if I can speak to the basement question on 2706, and I've got that in front of me now. I mean, these lots are contiguous, and there's a very slight slope downward from Belmont Boulevard to the alley behind them. They basically share the same lot profile. The garage in the 2706 proposal and what's being constructed lies that the floor of that garage, considered a quote-unquote basement garage, lies essentially at the same level as our floor of our garage is going to lie, which is about 6 feet below finished floor level of either house you pick. I mean, I don't have a surveyor, but it's a shallow Belmont garage, shallow Belmont basement height. They're all there.
So in your opinion, they're equivalent or very close to it?
We're shorter. I mean, they do have a 10-foot floor to floor structure, from finished floor to finished floor. They do have a steeper pitch, so they have a slightly lower eave at the perimeter, but they've got dormers that take it just as tall as ours, if not taller.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Do you still want to get maybe what Sean's original thing was too?
I don't know. I want to understand. Does this commission rely on the zoning administrator for its definitions? I guess is one question.
It depends on what you're talking about. Some things obviously we don't. We rely on our own definitions that are in the design guidelines. But in this case, it's also got to go through codes. Mm-hmm. And they're going to look at, is it attached? Is it detached? Is it a detached accessory dwelling unit or not? It gets a little sticky because normally we don't review use. And we still don't review use, but if the use is a detached accessory dwelling unit, then we do review the design of it, if that makes sense. So it's just part of what makes this all a little more complicated. Does that answer your question?
Okay, go ahead, Rose.
Yes.
May I suggest to the commission that it would be, that this is what's before us, before Sean amended it. This is before us. It is our duty, legally, to consider what's before us and nothing else. Because what Sean's amendment, the amended application, or whatever you want to call it, There's no notice. There is absolutely no notice, no 7-day notice on whatever you proposed just a minute ago. What we have that's got the legal notice on it is the original thing that's before us. Now, having said that, that's my opinion. Everybody else can have theirs, but that's my opinion. It is my further opinion that we can consider this based on our own guidelines. If it doesn't comply with zoning, that's the applicant's problem, because they got to go over there and they got to get whatever codes is going to get them over there. If they don't get it, it's not our problem. It's his problem.
In this case, with all due respect, I think it is a little bit our problem.
I disagree.
Because we are trying to figure out what the definition is, how this should work. We've led them down one path. We're finding out that's not the correct path. It's not your problem, but I do believe that staff, is to blame for this being so complicated. I don't think we could have helped it. We didn't know to foresee these types of things. But I do think it isn't a whole new proposal, but just maybe some alterations, as you often approve conditions for, that might need to take place in order to get them where they need to be. So again, maybe the easiest thing is just to recommend approval with the condition that they work with staff to make sure that we don't send them down to codes and waste their time.
Rob, one question. 2706, the neighboring property, was analyzed as an attached garage, and that was approved as an attached garage. So it was reviewed as an addition and approved as an addition. Taking that, if we move to 2708, and if it is attached, then it's not a dadu. Doesn't matter what they put up there. They can put 5 bathrooms up there. It doesn't matter. No?
That's not the way codes would see it.
I'm saying if it's attached, then we're not reviewing floor plans and codes. It's part of the house. It's attached.
I think the rub's in the shower and the sink.
But it's part of the house. It's an underneath. When we review a house and the base, it's a garage. They don't. A garage underneath.
I'm just thinking that's where.
Okay. Well, pretend I am. Okay. Pretend I'm right.
I'm
so, if we look at 2708, if codes deems it attached, then it's an attached garage, and we don't have a problem. If codes deems the porch to cause a quote detachment, then it's a dadu, and that's okay too. So I think all we care about is the massing and whether we're okay with it, and let codes sort out whether it's attached or not.
Which I think is
Isn't that it?
That's exactly what I think is our consideration here. I don't think that we owe anybody, any applicant, the consideration of figuring out, okay, well, I think codes is going to, or the zoning people are going to think it's a certain way, so we're worried about that for you, so we're going to do it some other way. That's their problem. We got our set of rules, and that's what we should follow.
Okay.
And that's my opinion. That's all I'm saying.
So let's just look at this as it is, and take into account what we've heard from Robin as well, and from okay. I'm typically wouldn't, but we're so out of whack here. Go ahead, Van.
1 second. The applicant is fully aware that what gets constructed and approved for occupation is entirely the province of Zoning and Codes Administration, and is not concerned about that in this case. We just want to know if we can do our addition or not. Okay. Thank you.
So I'd say we listen to Robin's recommendation, so that, because in all due fairness to the applicant, this switched right on them, and they need to be able to keep moving with it. So I think at this point we should just be able to give them a motion so that they can work with staff to get this resolved as quickly as possible.
Well, but I don't even know if they need to. I think they have the right to say, I'm going to call this an addition, and I'm not going to work with staff, and I'm going to go see what code says. I think they have that right.
True.
Yeah. They do.
So I don't think we have to say that they have to go back and work with codes.
Well, we have to make a recommendation. Make
a recommendation that they have to work with staff. I think if they believe that it's an addition and that they can convince codes, I think they can ask for that, and that's what they've asked here.
May I throw a kink in the works? There's also the possibility of setting a dangerous precedent here, and that's why I recommend that we kind of all work together on this. If they go to codes and code says it's not attached, and therefore it is a dadu, and so it's fine, then you've just approved a very large attachment to a dadu.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. But it gets back to what basically what Hunter was saying in the beginning now, which we should listen to probably.
So you're
Sean's.
talking about guidelines, guidelines for attachment are different than codes.
Design guidelines for the addition. So if we can just approve it so that they can work through those issues, I'm probably saying too much, but if we can get that kind of recommend, then that way we can still get the design guidelines worked with the addition, what the applicant needs, as well as meeting what this commission needs as well. Did everybody kind of?
I still disagree that we have any guidelines about what is an attachment for the purposes of DADU. DADU is just a separate code that has to do with zoning and use. It doesn't. And then we've got these. If you fall into that and you want to use it that way, then there's these special parameters.
Well, it would get back to the reasons why they had originally disapproved it. It gets back to those guidelines, those concerns. That's what it gets back to. And basically, if I'm maybe putting words into your mouth, but basically if it gets back to some of those original concerns that could be worked out.
Could I ask one question, please? In our guidelines, we have guidelines for outbuildings, not for DADUs. DADU is a zoning term, is that correct?
We have design guidelines for outbuildings. We also have, that's under our authority to review, standards for detached accessory dwelling units. And one of those is that it needs to be 10 feet from the building.
So, by our definitions, an outbuilding, if it has an accessory dwelling unit in it, it is not an outbuilding.
Correct.
It's a DADU.
Correct.
Okay, and we have guidelines for DADUs.
Correct. We have
guidelines
standards.
for additions.
Yes.
Okay.
Can I get a motion? Oh, well, I'm sorry. You had one more statement.
This is a spoiler alert. When I got the disapproval a week ago, I talked to some people with codes, and they're wondering what the problem is too. Ms. Cantrell, I really appreciate your perspective on this. I'll take my chances with codes. I would, but.
Okay.
I hear the concern is the parade of horribles.
Yeah.
What would happen if?
Okay.
But
I appreciate that. Let me see if I can get a motion. Okay. If legal has something else to say about it.
I just wanted to also give you a perspective in terms of looking at appeal and what could be sustained potentially on appeal. And I happen to agree from a legal perspective with Commissioner Cantrell with regard to what is before you and what your decision has to be. It has to be based on what's before you. That being said, I kind of was waiting for someone to actually ask that question before saying that, because I didn't know if you would get to it in the discussion, and you did get to it in the discussion. So I just, at this point, since no one has asked, I think I have to say that I think that's correct. And I think that is sustainable on appeal if you make your decision based on what's before you. If you get into kind of the details of, and this is of no fault to the staff, because it's my understanding that they were just made aware that there was a difference in how it could be interpreted by codes as to how they interpreted it and how they reviewed it and what their recommendation was based on what they thought they had before them. So I think that's all you can really do is review what you have and make the best possible decision with the information that you currently have, understanding that there may be another agency that may view it differently, and it may ultimately result in him coming back here if he is not allowed to do what he has contemplated because this approval would not cover that. So I think you have to kind of look at it that way. So.
Yeah, I agree, especially now. So that's
I agree.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the application as an addition that is consistent with the Belmont Hillsborough Conservation Overlay Guidelines and consistent with precedent at 2706, and not alternatively as a DADU. That's it.
I second that.
Comment, please. I guess, and I don't disagree with that, but I guess what we haven't heard is why the staff was recommending disapproval on this application.
Yeah.
So I don't think we can make, I would suggest we table the, I don't know what we have to do, but to...
Well, or...
I thought we did.
And this is, we're all out of rules of order, but I guess that was the part about if we would require that they work with staff, that way we could get what they were disapproving with it. That was why I felt like we needed that condition. But that being said, we do have a motion.
We have a motion and a second on an application for an addition at 2708 Belmont Boulevard, period.
And we did have a question, so we had to deal with that. Okay, so unless you're ready, unless he wants to rescind it, then we'll vote on this.
Well, could I ask the staff to give us the reasons why they are recommending disapproval?
Well, let's
I'd like to hear one about the setback.
Right. Given the precedent that we've heard about.
Okay, I would need somebody to need you to rescind your.
Oh, yeah, I would.
I think this is just discussion.
You can you can go ahead and discuss.
I'll table my motion.
Okay.
And
I'll withdraw my second.
Okay.
I'll be good.
All right, Sean. I think we said this 20 minutes ago.
I won't answer that because this was my decision. I take full responsibility for it. We've had a lot of pressure, as you know, from the neighborhood with every addition and every garage that comes before us. And not all of it that you hear, but we certainly hear it on the staff level. Concerns about the massing and scale of these additions and new construction and new garages. You have very specific policy for when to allow for setback reductions. So we were trying to take a very hard line in looking at that in order to keep the massing and the footprints and all of that down on additions. It is true that next door is essentially the same thing. It was just approved last year. We've since looked at that, not sure that that is appropriate. Wanted to talk to you about, taking this harder stance with rear setbacks if it is an addition. In my recommendation right now, because this is so confusing and there are so many questions, I would just forget all about that and just take this as if staff is recommending approval of this addition that is not a DADU. Does that help?
So the rear setback is your sole issue with it?
That was the only thing.
Because the base zoning is 20 feet and this is 10?
That's right.
And you basically feel like now, based on it, that is something we could allow.
I still think it's something we should look at more carefully, but for this case today, I would recommend approval.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So there's a motion. There's a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Motion carries.
It was aye.
2009 19th Avenue South.
I will offer to buy the first round for everybody who sticks around to the end of this, applicants and attendees included. Set on the record. Can I have a moment with the zoning administrator? Just
What's going on? Oh, you have to leave? Okay.
But you got a quorum here. Meeting at 5:30.
Okay.
Teach at 5:30.
Okay.
I'll see you next time.
All right, thank you.
Keep on temper better.
No, you did good. You did good. I think the commissioners want to take a 2-minute break now.
Okay.
Okay.
The house at 2009 19th Avenue South, is a 2-story brick, basically a 4-square style house. It was constructed circa 1915. There's a 2-story rear addition that was built in 2010. 2011, this commission approved a detached garage, just an outbuilding with an irregular footprint, roughly 852 square feet. That building was not constructed, although the concrete pad, the floor was poured for use as a parking pad. So that's in place. And they are applying, next slide, to use that existing footprint that was poured and construct a new 2-story outbuilding there. The first floor footprint is 852 square feet. The upper story will not have the same, or the full area. The area of that will be 527 square feet. Next slide, please. The materials are essentially the same as the structure that was approved there in 2011, and essentially also the same as the addition approved the year before. Brick, cement fiber, stucco panels, composition, shingle, all of those materials are appropriate. With the way that the second story area is smaller than the first floor footprint, staff kind of looked at it and thought of it similar to an aeroplane dormer, at least as you view it from the north and the south. The east elevation that is shown here, staff found that the full width of that being 26 feet wide, it was a little too residential in character, and the perceived massing from the street was too residential, too great, and not subordinate. After sending the staff recommendation, but certainly with enough time that staff was able to review, the applicant revised the upper story floor plan, essentially just rotated it 90 degrees so that the narrower profile is what you would see from the east, from 19th Avenue South. And those drawings have been passed out around before you. Like I said, they were received after the deadline, but with enough time since then that staff has taken a look. Based on the drawings that you have before you now that have just been passed around, with the revised upper story floor plan, staff recommends approval with the condition that staff and the applicant review the final details, such as door locations, all of those standard things, materials that have not been specified in the drawings.
Okay, thanks. Any questions, Sean?
Does that sound, the applicant is here too, if you have questions.
I would just ask if the chair would entertain asking if there's anyone here to speak in opposition of it, and if not, we can cut to the chase.
Oh, okay. All right, well, as long as the applicant doesn't have anything they'd like to say.
I'm here if you have any questions.
Okay. And so open public hearing, anybody want to speak regarding this project? Okay. All right, close public hearing. Discussion or a motion?
Move approval. Staff recommend with staff's conditions.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Motion carries.
I'd also make the suggestion when we switch horses midstream from what's been posted publicly and what we approved here? Did we somehow upload that and show that we approved something different than what everyone has ever seen?
Okay, 2401 Fairfax Avenue.
Sure. 2401 Fairfax Avenue is a vacant lot located at the corner of 24th Avenue South and Fairfax Avenue. The house is part of a larger development of 3 houses planned for the site, which was formerly 2 lots. This is the last of the houses to come before the commission. The other 2 houses at 2403 Fairfax and 1833 24th Avenue South were approved by the commission in October 2012, and their construction is near completion. Next slide. Here's a site plan showing the proposed infill in relation to the other houses that are part of the development. Although the site plan shows a garage, elevations for the garage were not submitted, and the garage is not part of the application before you. The house is wider than it is deep and is wider than typical houses in the neighborhood. Staff finds this width to be appropriate, as the shallowness of the lot encourages a structure that is wider, and because the setback of the right side of the house mitigates the massing as seen from the street. Next slide. The materials for the infill include brick, stone foundation, wood paneling, cedar shakes, asphalt shingle roof, and wood or cement fiberboard trim. Staff just asked to review the brick and stone samples and the final window and door selections and the shingle color. Let's see. Here are the side elevations. Next slide. The roof shape is a cross gable with a primary pitch of 1212, which is a typical roof form in the district. The roof dormers are appropriate in scale. The majority of the windows are twice as tall as they are wide, meeting the historic ratio of windows, and the fenestration pattern also meets the design guidelines. Next slide. Here's the rear facade. The rear porch will be screened. Next slide. These are the photos of the 2 houses that are part of this larger development. The one on the top is next door to the site in question at 2403 Fairfax, and the one on the bottom, 1833 24th Avenue South, is just behind the site that you're looking at right now. And one more slide, just a view of the site kind of from 24th Avenue South, so you can see the 2 other houses that are under construction. So in conclusion, staff recommends approval with the condition that staff provide final review of windows, doors, brick, stone, location of HVAC, and roof color. Okay. And I believe the applicant's here.
Any questions? Okay, would the applicant like to say anything?
Very brief, but I've been here all day, so why not? Big thanks to staff for working with us on all 3 of these. The footprints and widths and things do sort of go beyond much of what is considered context, but we were able to sort of negotiate all those things through. And what we were able to gain out of that are some really nice lots with a lot of good green space. I think it takes advantage of lots that are sort of irregular in how they had to be configured. So I'm very appreciative of that. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Anybody in the open public hearing, anybody in this audience like to speak regarding this project? Okay, close public hearing.
Move approval of staff recommendation.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, thank you. 1802 Lakehurst Drive.
1802 Lakehurst Drive is a new lot that was subdivided from 1800 Lakehurst Drive to the right of the property. The lot's within the Little Hollywood area of Lockland Springs, East End, which has a different context than the rest of the neighborhood, and that's why I threw up a couple of those images to show you that context. Next slide, please. The 2-story massing, height, roof shape, orientation, rhythm, and proportions of windows and setback are similar to several buildings in the neighborhood, and the height as measured at the front is in keeping with other infill projects approved in the neighborhood. Next slide. The massing is minimized with setbacks to the front wall, much like you saw in the last project. The massing in relation to the house to the left, which is at a lower grade, is minimized with the use of a front corner porch rather than 2 full stories on that corner. The materials are appropriate for the district and have all been approved by the commission in the past. The project includes front-loading garages, which is unusual for many of our districts, however, is a typical feature for this particular portion of the district. The historic garages are 1 bay and too small to accommodate modern cars, so rather than having a full 2-bay garage facing the street, they angled it and pushed it back a little bit, so it's minimized. The location of utilities was not noted on the plans. Staff recommends that it be located on the side or beyond the midpoint, or in this case, possibly even on the roof. So staff recommends approval with the condition that windows and doors be approved by staff prior to installation, and that the utilities be located at the rear or on the side beyond the midpoint or on the roof. and staff finds infill design to meet the design guidelines for new construction for the neighborhood. You did receive a 3-page letter via email that's not in support of the project, and the applicant is here if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, Robin? Okay. Would the applicant like to say anything? Just state your name and address.
David Baird, 5007 Wyoming Avenue, applicant and the architect. This is a really challenging site. It slopes from the back right corner down to the front left-hand corner about 16 feet. And so we've been trying to minimize the height of this house by making it as low as possible. Also, we were sort of encumbered by an access easement to the right, which going into the garage is about 6 feet higher than the left-hand side of the site. So I'm here to answer any questions anybody opposing might have or the commission might have.
Okay, thank you. Anybody, would you like to speak on behalf of this project? Okay, just state your name and address, and please limit to 2 minutes.
My name is Scott McEwen, and I live at 1812 Lakehurst, down the street from here. My wife was the one who sent the email. I got copies if you didn't read them. There you go. I'm prepared to speak a little bit about this, but mostly I'm here to ask for a continuance on judgment of this property due to the fact that our neighborhood, it's a very small little neighborhood of 12 houses, and no one knew about it up until a couple days ago. And there was no signs out or any kind of, so we didn't even know that parcel was sold off. And even the person next door to it in this White House, who this thing will be encroaching on. He didn't hear about it until like 2 days ago. So we haven't had a lot of time to prepare for this. And that gentleman in the White House is actually out of town for a month. He's in Oregon or wherever he's from. If we can't have a continuance, I'm prepared to talk a little bit about it, but that's what I'm here to ask for.
Yeah, only the applicant can ask for a deferment for it,
Okay. Well, then, if I may,
I'll give you some of your time back, but can you make it within a minute, I guess?
Yeah, sure. We feel like these drawings are out of scale. If you go to this site, those 2 houses flanking are a lot closer than it appears in this drawing. The proposed house is 4,000 square feet. That would be the biggest home in this little neighborhood. Have you guys ever been to Little Hollywood before? These first 3 houses set the whole tone and pacing of the neighborhood. And we feel like putting in a 4,000 square foot, squeezing it between these 2 stately homes is going to just ruin the whole neighborhood. Feels that you will ruin the pacing of the neighborhood. And so I can give you numbers on square footage plus acreage of the house. I'm sure you all know about that kind of stuff, though. But the houses flanking are like the other biggest house in the neighborhood is 3,200 square feet, which I believe is the Brown house there, and that's on 0.58 acres. This will be 4,000 square feet on 0.23 acres. So we just feel like it's just not in scale with the neighborhood at all, and we believe that the pacing of it will. And the sharing of the driveways is it's gonna ruin the whole feel of what makes that neighborhood kind of special. And the height. There's a bunch of these points that if you go through, there's the height is it's going to be higher. If you look at it, a lot higher than the house, the White House next to it. Okay, that's it. I'm not much of a public speaker, but
you're doing fine.
I wish someone else from the neighborhood, like we say, everyone had to work. Every single person had to work. We all just found out about it.
Okay.
We plead, mercy on that, so we could have a more eloquent person than myself come and speak to you all.
Okay. Well, thank you. Appreciate you coming out. Okay, close public hearing. I guess I'll just throw out the question, were the signs, everything put up like?
This project didn't require any signs or any notices.
Okay.
Building a building on a lot, people have by a right to do. So the only time that it's noticed with signs or letters to the neighborhoods, there's some element of the bulk zoning is changing, or there's some other kind of zoning change, and that wasn't the case for this project.
Gotcha, thanks. Okay, any questions or discussion?
I'd just like to respond in my personal observation based on the comments the gentleman had that I think the design is a very good one, and with the setbacks and the placement of it, I think at the end of the day will be a very nice. I personally think it'll be a very nice addition to your neighborhood, and won't be as massive as maybe you perceive it to be. But that's just my take on it.
I tend to agree with Richard, and after receiving the letter, email, it was either a day or two ago, I drove through this morning and drove back through, and as the architect said, it's a very challenging site, but I think he's done a remarkably good job fitting it in with the grade and turning it. It's hard to see here in two dimensions, but there is a curve there, and the way that it follows that setback, I think it'll end up contributing more than it would detract.
Okay, have a motion or any more discussion?
I'll move we approve staff recommendation.
Okay, have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. I was going to make a suggestion that we not do P through S, but I'm open to what you guys think.
Just on the notice issue, I know we're not required to, but I wonder if we should anyway, to treat all the projects the same. Because I do think it's important for the credibility that people...
There's several issues with that. One is budget. We don't have the funding for signs or the staff to put up signs. And two, I'm concerned about the precedent would set. There's no other department that has to put up notices for what people do that if they are allowed to do by right. So for us to start doing it, even if we could afford it.
So we only put up signs when someone's asking for a setback variance or something like that?
That's right. Okay. Which, even that, we're not required to do. But we do it because we think it's important for the neighbors to know. But even that's not a requirement.
I do think it's a little different when somebody subdivides off a piece of their property. I think it's a surprise to the neighbors. I don't think it helps the way that people feel about the historic overlay when they're surprised.
That's planning's process.
Okay.
And they may have noticed that. I don't know what their requirements are.
What do you guys feel? You're up for P through S, or do you?
Is there any rush? If not, I would propose
just those old families, but
any rush to approve this?
Yeah, that's a good point. Is there? Do we have to? Can we do these next month? P through S.
I think we've deferred one of these already. The rules of order.
I think we should elect officers this month.
Okay. How about if we just do S then, and then we'll go from there. Just because it's almost 6, I know, and we've all did do a lot. I always want to give the applicants their fair share, but just us. So I've forgotten how we do this now. Do we just make a motion for chairman and then a vice chairman, right?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll take motions for chairman.
Would you like to do it again?
Sure. Sure, I would. I don't mind.
All right.
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Okay, we need a vice chairman now.
Who's the current vice chair?
Ann is.
Connor, would you like to do it
No,
again?
Ann is. Ann.
Nominate Ann.
Second.
Okay, all in favor of Ann? Aye. All opposed? Okay, that was tough. All right, motion, meeting adjourned.